Hey everyone, and welcome to the new episode of Sharing with Shellshock. I am your host, ShellshockPrime, and tonight we are here with another episode where we talk about different topics with multiple guests, and we got 4 guests tonight. This week we're going to be doing gaming magazine memories, where we talk about different gaming magazines. This is the sequel to Nintendo Power, where we did Nintendo Power last year, and now it's more than just that. We have plenty of magazines, including Nintendo Power, of course. Joining me are 4 different guests, all of which have been returning. They have been previously on this show before. So we got Jeremy, the Nostalgia Alchemist. Welcome.
Hi, Shell. How are you? Hi, everybody. How's it going?
It's going good. It's good to see you. Welcome back on the show.
Thanks for having me back. Always a pleasure.
Yep. And Mick Patches, welcome back to the show.
Hello, everybody. I'm always glad to be here.
Yep, good to see you too. And we also have ZensPath, also named Jeremy. Welcome.
How's it going? Glad to be back.
Well, glad to have you back too. And also, RetroGamingBacklog. Welcome back.
Hey, y'all. Thanks for having me back, Joe. It's always a pleasure, bud.
It's always a pleasure to have you too. So, with that in mind, before we get started on the topic at hand, let's talk about what type of content we do. And Nostalgia Alchemist, you first.
All right. Thanks, Shell. First of all, I want to thank everybody, all the guests here for joining Shell tonight. This is going to be really cool. Before we even went live, we already started talking, so I feel like this is going to be a really cool conversation. I'm very excited.
Yeah.
Anyway, hello, everybody. My name is Jeremy. I am the Nostalgia Alchemist, and I am always here for whenever you remember why. And when you come and visit anything that I have on the internet, it is where we can glance back to focus forward. We are a progressive nostalgia brand so that we can utilize the past and see how we can change things for the better for the future. Not only am I here on Twitch, I am also doing podcasts. I am trying to get back on YouTube, doing TikToks here and there. I am a father of 2 and a husband of 1 awesome wife. And I am also a SAG-AFTRA union member. Right now, we are in the middle of trying to get to negotiations with the video game companies so that we can work out a really good deal. So there might be a couple of things I may not be able to discuss tonight. So any of those, I'll just kind of go radio silent, but it won't be too much. We're talking about a lot of the old gaming magazines, so it should be fine.
Yeah.
But I'm a big advocate of supporting my union, and also for all performers out there, and for anybody out there who is willing or wanting to get into this kind of entertainment, try it. You will be very surprised. Coming from a union and being trained all my life, this space has been a life-changing experience, and I guarantee that you will find amazing friends if you are into this. So once again, my name is Jeremy, and I'm really happy to be here.
And again, I'm happy to have you on.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, McPatches, your turn. What type of content you do?
A little bit of everything. I make patches 3D. Sometimes I can be a little bit of 2D. I play a lot of RPGs throughout the year, but then like this time of year, I go heavy into horror because it's like one of my jams. Like most of my shelf over here is retro RPGs and survival horror games. But I do dabble into other stuff like roguelikes and indie games. I'd say for the most part, though, like just various RPGs throughout the year is the big one. I do dabble a little bit on TikTok. I haven't been active in a bit, but I'm working on some other content. I don't want to talk too much about it until I actually like do it, so that I don't like get my brain going, hey, I did the thing without doing it. But I have some new videos and stuff that I'm working on to try to like expand my creativity.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Very good. All right, ZensPath, your turn.
So my name is also Jeremy. I'm the older one, so I was technically here first. I'm the host of the ZensPath Entertainment Network podcast. Me and a group of friends every week get together, talk about gaming news, topics that we enjoy. We have our big question every week that we discuss. We also do a series called The Extra Quarters, which are bonus episodes where we kind of do like what you're doing here. We pick a topic, we talk about that one. We just released one yesterday on Gears of War, of that whole series. If you want to find me online, it's going to probably be over at ZensPath, mostly over on Threads. I'm not really over on Twitter much anymore. It's become a bit of a hellscape.
Yeah.
So from that, I stream rarely. Mostly, I'm an electronics engineer and a drone pilot and a photographer, so that takes up a lot of my time and what I'm usually working on. either restoring old game consoles or working on radar systems or whatever I have to do. So yeah, I just keep busy.
Yep. And that's exactly what you need to do.
Yep.
Now RGB, your turn.
Hi, y'all. I'm RetroGamingBacklog. I'm not a Jeremy. I'm an Andrew, but I mainly stream here on Twitch, only playing on original consoles, usually old stuff like NES. Mostly been sticking to Nintendo lately, but I do want to branch off into like a PlayStation and Xbox here eventually. We're gonna get them, but lately we did some Pokemon. Then I had my computer break on me, and I've been trying to fix that all up. And we're gonna get back into the spooky season here real soon. But yeah, we occasionally do some modern games, but it's usually voted on by the community whenever we do that. But we usually stick to our old school stuff on original hardware. So
Yep.
Pretty much all I'm about.
That's how to do it too. Yep. So we're gonna get started by talking about what your first video game magazine was that you could recall, and when do you recall reading it. So Nostalgia Alchemist, we'll go with you.
I actually have it right here. So back when I was 5 years old, I received a copy of Super Mario Brothers 3 for my NES. And along with that copy, my mother happened to find this in the store. And this is volume number 13 of Nintendo Power. So this is the very first video game magazine that I ever owned. And then a couple of years later, I would say around maybe third grade, we had one of those magazine drives at my school. And I said to my mother, I was like, no, I have to get Nintendo Power. And ever since September of 1993, I collected every, or maybe spotting 1, 2, maybe 5 here and there, but I collected pretty much almost every issue since then, and then have been back checking, whichever other copies or volumes of Nintendo Power, but this one right here. And for those of us in the room here, you will notice that I have the old school book binding, with the adhesives that you used to put on your textbooks to protect them.
Yep.
So my mother luckily did that because the back was starting to get a lot of wear and tear. And if you can see that, they have the bubble tape right down the spine there. So you could tell that this book has been shown a lot of love, a lot of care, has been through 7 different states. My cousin borrowed it for this one specific page so that they could get all the power-ups in the Mario 3 game. So but this is a very cherished piece of literature, I would say, for preservation purposes. This is a very cherished piece of literature in my library, and this is where it all started.
Yeah, very good. It's a good way to start. McPatches, what about you?
I don't remember exactly what my first one was. I know back in the day I collected like the PlayStation magazine a lot, and then the one that I had a subscription to was Game Now, which died in 2004. I think this is when they ended it. They had like guides in there, little tips, mostly cheat codes, which is what I was like, heck yeah, get all them cheat codes. I'm gonna get infinite lives. Screw this game. But that was one, and I remember like reading about all the different games that I didn't have on the console for, so I'm like, oh, I want a console for that.
Yep.
And entering those contests that like fill in this thing and then send it in. You might win the ultimate gaming experience. Never won.
Yeah. There's always those contests you enter and then you don't win. But there was a question that was asked for the community questions. We'll get to that later on. So ZensPath, what about you?
So I don't remember the exact first issue that I read, but I do remember moving to Florida in about middle of third grade, and some of the other kids were bringing in Nintendo Powers, and that was the first time I'd ever gotten a hold of being able to read those. And we flip through it, find out what games we want to go hunt for, because back in our day, we had this thing called rental stores.
Yep.
And this is before Blockbuster was a big thing. It was just some of the local little ones. Even you could rent from like grocery stores. It was ridiculous. But
Yes.
seriously, we would go and I would talk my mom into letting me rent a game, and I'd be like, oh, I read about this one when, such and such brought that issue in. And we would go from there. And my parents normally never let me get any of the subscriptions. So I'd have to hunt down either secondhand from what other people were done reading, or I would sneak over while they were grocery shopping and try and flip through the one on the rack really quickly until I could save up a little bit and start getting them myself. But yeah, that's what got me started into gaming magazines, and it pretty much never ended until they stopped publishing in most of them.
Yeah. What about you, RGB?
Gosh, well, I remember the first issue I ever subscribed to with Nintendo Power was February of '99. Believe it or not, but that wasn't the first time I was exposed to it, I guess you'd call it. Because growing up, I had an older neighbor. I lived out like 9 miles out of town, kind of in the middle of nowhere. But my one neighbor was kind of within walking distance, and he was like 8 years older than me. So he had like all the Nintendo stuff, and he had all the Nintendo powers and all that. And that's kind of how I learned a lot of the tricks. Get the first whistle in Super Mario Brothers 3 and all that sort of thing. And I remember as a kid, I was like, I had the chance to subscribe to Nintendo Power or to the Lego magazine. My parents gave me the option, and for whatever reason, I chose the Lego magazine. I kind of regret that now, but I didn't actually subscribe to Nintendo Power until '99. But
Yep.
But yeah, gosh, it was the Mario Party issue too. I remember that was pretty cool. I like really got sucked into it. I actually don't have that issue. My original issue, I had to get a renew one because that one that went with me everywhere and it just got destroyed. But I remember like the only contest I ever entered was like the Smash Bros one. That one really hung out with or stuck in my mind.
Yeah.
Because there was like a lot of cool stuff they gave out, but. Gosh, yeah, over the years, I was kind of the one where you'd pick up some gaming magazines, like, wherever you see, like, your local thrift store, wherever. I know, like, Tips and Tricks was, like, not very many people talk about that one, but that one was kind of everywhere, along with GamePro and Game Informer. It was kind of always just that cool thing, you go back in the day where you could go over to a friend's house and they might have, like, this random gaming magazine you'd never seen before, and you're like, what is this? Oh, shoot, this is a cool magazine, That's a cool game, I never heard about that one. It seems like it's a dying art, unfortunately, but it was always exciting to find gaming magazines, no matter what they were.
Yeah. I don't remember what the first magazine that I've actually read was, but the first one that I know that we bought, we actually got a subscription to Game Informer back in like summer of '94 to June of, it was like July '94 to June of '95. We only had it for 1 year because this was, and keep in mind, this was back when there was Funkolands. There wasn't GameStops back then. It was Funkoland, and I went to a local Funkoland, which now it's a GameStop, but back then, in the neighborhood where I used to live at, they had the Funkoland, and they just opened at that particular time in '94, and we ended up just getting a subscription to Game Informer around that time. And what I remember, because we were just looking to see what games we wanted to get, which we ended up not getting any games that day, but we did get a subscription to Game Informer, and it was the July '94 issue, which had BattleTech on it. Streets of Rage 3 was featured, and they were also showcasing a bunch of other games. The primary consoles around this time were the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, and also the Atari Jaguar was around at the time, and I think the 3DO was out by this point too. I'm not so sure. And I don't remember if this was the issue or the issue afterwards was when like I saw like the previews of the Super Game Boy. It was one of those two. It was the July one or the August one from 1994. But what happened is this. Like I read these issues, and I remember like there was one that had Sonic and Knuckles featured back in like in the fall, like it was coming out like in October that year. I remember reading up about different games on the Super Nintendo and Genesis, and then first reading about the Sega Saturn, which was launching in Japan late '94, but we didn't really get much info on that till later. The same thing about like learning about the PlayStation, and also the fact that Nintendo was working on a 3D console at the time, which I believe it was before they called it the Ultra 64, but I remember reading all these magazines, and then eventually it would lead me to getting like different magazines in general. The funniest thing is that the last issue that I got before the subscription run out was how I found out about Earthbound. That was the first time I've ever seen anything about Earthbound, and I was like, wow, like I didn't at the time I didn't even know what an RPG was. I've heard of Final Fantasy, but I didn't know much about what Final Fantasy was at the time. I was like 8 years old. And seeing Earthbound, I was like, wow, this looks great. Just seeing the characters, it was like a like you have kids and all that stuff. I'm like, yeah, this looks great. Which little did I know, it actually is a game that would mean a lot to me later in my life. But yeah, and I will say the first time I've ever seen a Nintendo Power issue was at my uncle's place. He had a couple of issues with that and some other magazines. The first issue I remember seeing for Nintendo Power, I don't remember what year it was, or what number it was, but it had the Addams Family. I think they were promoting a Super Nintendo Addams Family game with Pugsley on it. I don't remember. It's fine. I don't remember.
Master's Quest.
No, it wasn't Fester's Quest, but it was a Super.
No.
It was a different game. It was on Super Nintendo. I don't remember what it was, but I remember.
I think it was Adam's Family Values.
It might have been that, or it might have been another game.
I know there is a Super NES game with Pugsley, and he's like the main character, and it's like really hard and difficult.
I think
But
I
can't
have
remember
that
the name of
volume
it.
I think I have that volume right behind me.
Yeah, and then it was like I grew up reading so many different magazines, which I'm going to talk more about in the next topic. But yeah, so Game Informer was my first. It was the July '94 issue because that was when we subscribed, and then it lapsed in June of '95. Like because I was finishing the 3rd grade, and then summer was about to start, but we didn't have any more issues left because the June '95 was the last one that we had. And my mom said that she was not going to renew because at the time, like my parents were still together when we had the subscription when it started, and then my parents separated when not a couple months afterwards. So we couldn't afford to keep the subscription going. I think it was like $15 to $20. I don't remember how much it was back then for Game Informer subscription, but I do remember that. Now we're going to go into the next topic, which is which gaming magazines did you read regularly, and did you have a subscription to any of them? And McPatches, we're going to start with you for this one.
I kind of touched that already. The main one I had the subscription to that I remember was Game Now, but I would often pick up the PlayStation magazine because the demo discs were great. I remember checking out some other ones. There was Expert Gamer or something. There's so many back in the day, like in the 90s and 2000s and stuff. There's just you go to the grocery store and there'd be a whole section that was just gaming and PC magazines. So I'd pick up random ones that had characters I liked on them, or had news about something, or a guide about a game. But yeah, the main two were for sure the Game Now and PlayStation. And PlayStation was because the demo discs, like I said.
Mm-hmm.
You'd get all the music videos and stuff on there. You'd get games. Sometimes they'd screw up and you'd have the full game. It's Wild Arms 1. Technically, you could go past the blocked off area and play the full game on the demo.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you, ZensPath?
I did eventually later in life get Nintendo Power as a subscription, specifically after I got married. My wife actually got that for me. I also remember getting pretty much the entire run of the official Dreamcast magazine when that came out for the demo discs and all that stuff. I still have all of them. That's a treasure trove of things to find.
Yeah.
And then the other one would be EGM, Electronic Gaming Monthly. That was kind of my go-to for a lot of stuff for a long time.
Yep.
Game Informer, you got that with your GameStop stuff, so obviously I had that for a little while as well. But most of them I would just kind of pick up as I found, which was always kind of a fun way to do it.
Oh, yeah. What about... Wait, what happened?
Game Now was a spin-off of EGM.
Mm-hmm.
So if people don't remember it.
It went so far as like, you had EGM, then they had EGM 2 because they were like, we have so much news, we need to make another magazine. I was like, all right, fine, I'll get that one too.
It got
Yeah.
it got overwhelming at that time. I do briefly remember Game Now, but I do remember more like EGM and EGM 2.
Yeah.
RGB.
Well, Nintendo Power was the only one that I ever had a full blown subscription to, but that wasn't even until issue like 117. I did have it until about the last 5 or 6 issues. I didn't even realize my subscription had run out. I was so mad because I heard, I was like, oh man, they're not going to be doing it anymore. Oh well, good thing I'm subscribed till next year. And then I looked at it and it was like this year, after it had already got it done, and I was like, oh no. So I had to like hunt down like the last 6 or 7 issues. And then once I did that, I was like, well shoot, I might as well just get the other 116 issues that I'm missing. So that's how I ended up with a complete set. But yeah, it was kind of cool because it was the only one I had a subscription to. But like I said, you pick up magazines, like everywhere. Gosh, I have a bunch of different ones too.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was the only one I had a subscription to.
All right. Nostalgia Alchemist.
Yeah, so it was the same with me. Nintendo Power all the way. The only other video game subscription that I had was Game Informer through GameStop, just like Zen said. So yeah, those were the only 2 that I had. I almost have a very similar story about the final issue. My subscription ended, and I didn't know just before the final issue of Nintendo Power. So I went to one of my local stores and I bought it just in case it never came in the mail. I'm glad I did because it never showed up. So I was able to acquire that. But just recently, I was able to acquire issue number 1, which you can't find almost anywhere. So I have a really great friend on Twitch whose name is Norman Bates Jr., Elizabeth, and they are so wonderful. Great friend. They were able to mail that to me, and that and Game Informer. But Game Informer it's interesting. I read it and I didn't think much of its value before I started to like understand the gaming sense, and then in terms of it being a viable source of people's either income or livelihood or just a piece of popular culture. And I unfortunately started to toss them or give them away. And I wish I hadn't, knowing that it was just going to stop abruptly and come to an end. So if I had an opportunity to go back, I would have kept and held on to all of those physical Game Informers. But now my son and I are part of Nintendo Force. Mm-hmm. And we get a subscription to that, both digital and physical. So it's wonderful to see how excited he gets when it comes in the mail. He's like, oh, it's two, and it comes bi-monthly instead of every month. So it's even more exciting for him. I didn't bring the volume down from his bedroom. He was actually still reading it, so I didn't want to, take it from him. But I digress. So yeah, those are the subscriptions that I've been a part of in my magazine collecting history.
Yep. So for me, so I had a couple. I mean, the only subs I ever had was that 1-year sub for Game Informer, and I've also had a sub for Nintendo Power, starting with the May 2002 issue, which had Spider-Man on it because they were promoting the Spider-Man game based off of the movie. That was the first one that actually wait, no. I think that was the first. Well, that was the first one I bought. I didn't sub yet. I think I'd sub in July. No, it was actually September. It was the Mario Sunshine issue. But I was buying issues, and then like my mom was like, it would save a lot more money if you got a subscription instead of just buying an issue for $5 every month. To which, and even then, when the issues were available, they were available towards the end of the month rather than the beginning, especially when some of these games were out. The subscribers would get them first, retailers would get them after. So we were getting a couple of issues, going to different stores, getting Nintendo Power issues, and then eventually it turned into a subscription, which lasted all the way until sometime in like the spring, like it was the spring of 2010, because at the time, like I was around that time I was mostly using the internet just to get the news and all that stuff. I just felt like Nintendo Power served its purpose. I didn't need it anymore. I did buy an issue, which I believe it was like a special NES edition, like anniversary issue, because they were celebrating the at the time 25 years of the NES in North America. And then after that, the next time I bought an issue was back in early 2012, because they had an AR card for Kid Icarus Uprising, which I got it. Little did I know, like, that was the year Nintendo was going to no longer have Nintendo Power magazine. And then that's where I got the final issue later that year, back in like, it was in November or December. It was like December, I believe, when we had the final issue. It was right after the Wii U launch. It's the only one that have reviews for Wii U games, because you know how the first issue you had Mario and you had King Wart, because they were hyping up Super Mario Bros. 2. And then the last issue, you had Mario and Bowser, because they were hyping up New Super Mario Bros. U for the Wii U. And as you can see, Germany Nostalgia Alchemist has both of them right there. It comes full circle, going from starting with Mario, ending with Mario. And although there were a couple... Yep. RGB has the right idea too.
Yeah, mine were in the other room. I couldn't get them in time.
It's all good.
I have them though.
Aside from Nintendo Power, I had some other issues from like different magazines. I had Tips and Tricks. I had GamePro. I had Game Fan, like Die Hard Game Fan. I do remember that one. I had let's see. So yeah, GamePro I read a lot of, and same thing with EGM. Like those are the main two that I would read. But I have, let's see, Tips and Tricks was another one. Like I used to get some of those code books that had like codes that spanned from NES all the way up to PlayStation 2. This was before GameCube, Game Boy Advance, and Xbox release. It was like PlayStation 2 was the latest system. They would have codes for pretty much everything. And I think the Game Boy Advance was about to come out around that time when I got this code book. And I know that they also had an updated one that eventually did have GameCube and Xbox and Game Boy Advance games, but they phased the NES games out. So it was from Super Nintendo and Genesis up to PS2, GameCube, Xbox, and GBA.
Yep.
And what I remember about Tips and Tricks was that they had a puzzle that you can do, and it's basically a rendition of a video game character sprite in 8-bit or 16-bit, and it actually looked cool doing that. But it was really nice just getting... I mainly got Tips and Tricks just to try to get like some codes for games and all that stuff. That's the reason why I did that. Yep, right there. That's another one right there. And the thing about
I love how like the majority of us came prepared.
Except me, I did not. I did not, unfortunately, but it's okay. But I remember for Tips and Tricks that it's how I actually got to know certain codes by heart. Also, another magazine that I remember. So I've never seen Sega Visions, but there was another Sega magazine I did see called Mega Play. Which was basically all Sega Genesis, because they were trying to compete with Nintendo Power, because Nintendo Power is all Nintendo. Because I know Sega Visions was more well known. Sega Visions had like Sega everything at the time. I would also see two different PlayStation magazines. There was the official PlayStation magazine, which Sony pretty much backed that one. And then there was PSM, which was more independent. So people on that were more critical about the games themselves compared to official PlayStation magazine. And at the time, there wasn't any competing Nintendo magazines in North America at the time. It was just Nintendo Power. I believe there was 1 or 2 Xbox magazines, and I think there might have been a Dreamcast only magazine. I don't remember, but what I do remember was that like the PlayStation magazines, because around that time, I think there was also another issue that I remember. I never owned this particular magazine, but it was called Next Generation, and I remember they had an article about yes. They had an article about the Nintendo 64. I watched a video one time where it said something is wrong with the Nintendo 64 because the Nintendo 64 was a cartridge-based system, whereas the PlayStation and Sega Saturn were CD-based consoles.
I had that volume.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what I remember was that at the time, the thing is that the reason why a lot of third parties did not really support the N64 is because CD-based consoles and having the CD technology, it was cheaper to manufacture, and you could store a lot more memory onto it compared to an N64 cartridge, where you're limited to what you can actually do, because Nintendo was thinking to itself that because the Sega CD didn't do that well, and they obviously and after the whole Nintendo Sony thing that did not go through, they were thinking that CD was not the future. To which little did they know, it was the future. And cartridges ended up not working well for them. But
which is funny because they're back to cartridges with the highest selling system now.
Yes, that's the funny thing right now about
irony.
that. Yes, and PlayStation ended up dominating that generation, and as well as the next one afterwards when they switched from CDs to DVDs, and now it's like the formats have changed over the years, but in terms of subscriptions, it was only just a 1 year for Game Informer. And I didn't really like Game Informer within like the 2000s, and especially the 2000s. Game Informer was the most anti-Nintendo. Like, if you love the GameCube, do not read Game Informer during that time. I remember when they gave the 1,000-Year Door like a 6.25 or something.
Jeez.
Like if you look, yeah, Game Informer was not good around that time. Like everybody else was a lot more fair, but yeah,
it is funny how many games like that are like eternally classic. Everybody loves that played them, but then like when you look back at the reviews, they're like, this game kind of sucks. It's okay or whatever. But then it just got a cult following and then grew from there.
because like, no, you go ahead.
It's one of my favorite things with the gaming magazines for going back to look at them is seeing those predictions. Because like I didn't find the issue here, but I have the one, I think it was EGM. They were talking about the Nintendo DS and the PSP and how the DS was going to be a complete flop. Why would they make this? It's garbage. The PSP is the future. And it's like, and the sales did not turn out like they thought they would. And it's really funny kind of seeing how these things play out, because you have, we're from the future. We get to see what they thought then, and it's hilarious to me.
It's also interesting because when you see the types of articles that are written and the ways that they're written, they seem like they're written either very pop on the fly, very like this is the one way, the small discs are the way of the future. Like, why stay with this? And it's interesting because we all understand that if we put ourselves back into that time period, it was either college, post-college for us in the mid 2000s. We can understand why somebody who is within our age range would say those types of things based on the types of games that we're releasing and the types of technology that were being put out at that time. So to see something as colorful and vibrant as the 1,000-Year Door when we are just entering the era of the PS3 and this sort of realism in gaming, it's very much a substantial argument to say that something like 1,000-Year Door at that time would not stand up. So I agree on a certain aspect of who would be writing those articles, but depending on who is in your staff, it's a hive mind. So of course there are going to be different magazines that have different points of view, and that's why there were so many. We get a wonderful array of different types of writing, different types of points of view, and I think it just catered to who was going to buy them. And I think that these magazine companies were very intelligent in knowing who was going to purchase those magazines.
Yeah. Yep. Because, and there were also magazines where they were trying to push a certain demographic, like basically push a demographic to like a certain type of game that they want people to like. For example, like I felt like Game Informer, like one of the things that they were trying to push mostly was PS2. Like they were mostly like heavy PS2. GamePro was more leaning towards PlayStation than the other platforms around this time as well. And you could easily tell that Game Informer had like the most bias from what I remember back then in favor of PlayStation 2. And don't get me wrong, I had a PlayStation 2. I have a PlayStation 2 and I enjoy it. But it's one of those things where it's like, I prefer everybody to be fair on every platform rather than just like showing one bias. And then like, because they were trying to put, there were some people that were trying to push the message that Nintendo was for kids and you should feel bad about playing these games. For if you're a teen or adults. Because I remember like being made fun of back in school, being like for just liking Nintendo, liking Pokemon and all that stuff. But once I got to college, nobody cared. Nobody cared at all. Yeah. And even if people didn't like any of that, they at least like respected what I like, and I respected what they like, and we have more mature discussions about it, as opposed to kids who like they just want to feel like they're edgy. They want to feel like that they're more adult, when in reality they don't. When you're teens, you don't really know exactly what you want out of life yet. You just try to act out. And they're like, oh, Nintendo's kid stuff, I grew out of that. I'm more into PlayStation. But then there's some people who feel like they're too cool for PlayStation, so they go to Xbox. And it's like, I'm going to Xbox. I'm drinking Mountain Dew. I think I'm more cooler than you are. And I'm like, yeah.
And then there are those quiet kids who are now running IT who are like, I'm a PC gamer.
Yeah.
I had a proper video game war setup because I was the Nintendo kid. My cousin that I constantly fought with got the Genesis, so of course I did not want anything to do with Sega. He didn't want anything to do with Nintendo. So it was literally family against family for that fight. So
yeah,
Thanksgiving was interesting.
no kidding.
Yeah, I had it easy. Like I had the Genesis at home, and then my grandma had the Super Nintendo. There wasn't really any like war there. I just went over and played the Super Nintendo.
Yeah.
Yeah. My cousin had a Genesis, but actually, you know what's funny now looking back, I'm actually more nostalgic to hearing the soundtrack of Sonic 2 than I am to hearing a lot of Super Nintendo stuff. So it's quite interesting how that works, because you don't know what you have, and you don't know what you have until you don't have it. And when you realize what you don't have might be in a somewhat interesting way better, or in a way that your memory kicks in a way that gives you that euphoric recall and the dopamine hits. It's quite interesting, because now when seeing Zen's tips and tricks that he pulled up, or seeing the old Electronic Gaming Monthly with the spread of the Street Fighter 2 that he put out, so when I saw that, immediately I said to myself, wow, when I was 8-9 years old, I remember seeing that style of advertising all over the shelves. It was either very boxy, color on picture, and those kinds of formats bring back that euphoric recall, and it's interesting to see how they market that.
And it's like, I remember there was this one gaming commercial when Capcom released Street Fighter 2 Special Champion Edition for the Sega Genesis. There was this guy, it was a security guard, walking in a toy store, and then right next, like they had a bunch of random generic games, and then you see Street Fighter 2 Special Champion Edition, and right next to it was the Genesis version of Mortal Kombat. And then all of a sudden, popping out of the Genesis Street Fighter 2 cartridge, or out of the case, you see Blanca's hand, and he just grabs the Mortal Kombat case and he just crushes it. And then once the security guard saw that, he just ran away, because it was around that time where Sega was basically like starting the whole like talking shit about Nintendo, and then Nintendo was biting back. Capcom did the same thing. They added fuel to the fire, but instead of Nintendo and Sega having a war with Capcom in the middle, it was Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat. And I just wanted to bring that up because I just thought that was funny back then. And when you look at the comments in the YouTube video on that, it's just a huge war between Street Fighter fans and Mortal Kombat fans wanting to talk about which series they think is better, which in reality right now, I'm going to have to say Street Fighter is overall better now. But back then it's like Mortal Kombat has some low points, Street Fighter has some low points, but they're both really good right now. But I prefer Street Fighter. But in terms of how like these magazines were back then, that's just how they were. So now let's move on to the next part of the topic, which is what are the most notable issues of gaming magazines that you own or that you used to own that you remember, and what were your favorites? And we're gonna go with you, ZensPath.
So the ones I always love to get, and I only managed to find a couple of them earlier, but my favorites were the ones always talking about the new consoles, the preview issues they would come out with, where, you know, they would be talking about like, here's the rumors for like the 360, you know, we're seeing that coming out first, and we're hearing the first bits of what the PlayStation 3 could be, or the next PlayStation, things like that. And you'd always get stuff like, you know, this is the EGM where they initially showed the launch, and who remembers the covers that you could get for the console, stuff like that. Always would find those, which was always kind of my favorites. I'm not sure 100% on, you know, what would be the rarer issues and so forth. I just get the ones I kind of enjoy, which we've already shown, you know, the EGM, the Street Fighter one that I always remember. With a lot of those, a lot of the old Nintendo powers, I always get the Metroids.
Yes.
Have to get the Metroids for all of those. But yeah, it usually comes down to, I've got a pretty good collection of when they're the rumor mills and when they're talking about stuff. And once again, that goes back to going back and looking at how these things were talked about. It's that's the lead up to a new system is always one of my favorite things. And as a bonus is the one thing we really don't get anymore, because we used to, you know, we had streaming and now we don't even have E3, but there would always be the E3 issues, those massive, you know, double, triple size issues that would come out late in the summer, and you're going like, oh, this is what all we were missing. Those I try and find those when I can as well. Those are some of the best ones to go dig through and see, you know, what came out, what didn't come out, like previews for games that just never made it, things like that. And that's the other part with the demo discs as well, finding a lot of these. I've got a couple demo discs that have got games, you know, playable demos that never released. The games just ended up not coming out. Or one of them, I'm trying to remember, it was a first-person shooter where you can control time, but they released the demo, you can play it, but they ended up scrapping and completely redoing the game. So it's the only way to play that version of it. So, I mean, these are true time capsules for gaming that I just love. So all of them kind of have an inherent value to me for that. So that's my long-winded answer.
Very good. RGB.
Print my...
Oh gosh!
Hold on. Before you do, what were you gonna say, Zen?
I was gonna say printing out my term paper for that now, but I was just making a joke. Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, RGB.
I always like the issues where they had like special covers, like you were talking about the Spider-Man one earlier. I actually, that was one of the ones my favorite. Like this was the subscriber edition where it had the special cover, whereas the regular newsstand was just like that. It was just, these things always had a special place in my heart, honestly. I always liked the extra added bonuses like subscribers got, you know, and I didn't really get it until I actually became a subscriber, you know, and or even like I said, this is my one issue of tips and tricks I happen to have. I think the only reason I picked this up at the time is because I was trying to beat this Toy Story 2 game.
Yep.
But oh man, what other issues did I have? I have quite a few other ones here. Like, oh, I remember this one here. This one, I remember, was I reading it in a Nintendo Power? I think it was like the scariest or most influential issue somebody was talking about in one of the letters, because it's like one of the goriest ones, really. It has like Dracula's desiccated head there and everything.
Looking
pretty wild stuff, really. But
parents complain about that one.
He did. Stuff like that. This is what I love about, like, you know, looking back in the capsules and like, oh man, you know, like how many issues of this just got thrown away by parents because they're like, oh, I don't want my kid reading that, you know?
Oh yeah, exactly.
But
Like anything else?
kind of my short-winded answer, I guess.
Oh, that's fine. Nostalgia Alchemist, what about you?
Yeah, you know what? I actually, just before we went live, I pulled out just a couple of my many issues of Nintendo Power, just to kind of go through the other ones that I have lying down here. When you get like the silver issue of Mega Man X, if I can glare it in just the right angle, you see X. And then, of course, when Nintendo Power hit their 100, they did a huge spread. But it's those issues like, you know, with the special Spider-Man cover. And then in 95, Nintendo Power had this huge 9 and huge 5 in all red for the Virtual Boy that was going to come out later that year. And we all know what happened to that little thing.
Yeah.
But this actually is my favorite volume of Nintendo Power. This one right here. This was one of their first really big bonus issues, and when you open the spread, it's got this beautiful spraying from the Magical Quest starring Mickey Mouse spraying Pete. And the only way you get that is from the subscriber bonus, and then you get this little room here that looks like a giant mess of a 90s kid's room, Gen Xer. And then inside of this volume here, you get a beautiful poster of Ren and Stimpy. Huge callback, but you know, again, like on top of that, you get these beautiful comics of Mario versus Wario, which was then subsequently reprinted in all of the Super Mario Adventures things. But the crowning jewel of this entire volume, if I can pull it up quickly, is let's see. Oh, there's two of them. There's a Mario Paint special, which you can learn how to do all of these different little art stamps, and they show you how to create animations. And then the other one that everybody, I think, would remember the moment that I show it. And if I could just find it back here.
While you're looking, I think that Mario Paint was like an excerpt from the actual book they released. You could get from Nintendo Power as a subscriber bonus.
Yes,
which I do have that book. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what that is.
I used it a lot during Animal Crossing, making patterns.
That's awesome. Yeah, I should have thought about that. Oh, that would have been cool.
It worked great for Mario Kart DS too, making custom designs for your car.
Oh, that would have been great. Oh, that's so cool. I don't know why I can't find this thing, but it had the I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't say what it was. Where is it? I'm sorry, everybody, I can't find it. But this volume had the Mega Man robot creation contest. So
I remember that.
I wanted to try and find the page of it so that I could show everybody, because that is the one thing that a lot of people remember about this magazine, period, is that we actually had an opportunity to contribute to making a brand new Mega Man robot. And of course, two of those robots went on to be created in Mega Man 6.
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead.
One of the winners was from the United States, and the other one was from Canada, and it was Nightman and Windman. Those were the two.
That's right. Yeah, and it was here it is. I found it.
I have that same issue. The art is ridiculous.
It's great just to see, you know, people from all different ages and styles, and this is what it's all about. Humans making art. What a concept.
Yeah.
You know? So, this is my favorite volume of Nintendo Power, and that's why it's back in this shrink-wrapped adhesive from my school year days.
Yep.
I think that was the biggest issue they ever came out with, too, if I'm not mistaken.
I have a feeling it was, too. It sold so much. And also, you got Mickey Mouse on the cover. So you also have the Disney people who were collecting those back then, grabbing it off the shelves as well.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
I actually forgot that's where the contest was, where you could actually make the Robot Masters for Mega Man 6. I actually forgot that was the one. I'll see if I can try to find one for a decent price, and I'll just get one for myself. McPatches? Oh, actually, hold on. Before you do, what are you going to say?
I might have an extra. DM me.
I'll DM you. Yes.
Okay.
All right. Make patches.
As far as like memory goes, one of the ones that I used to have that I really stuck out was I think it was Game Now. It might have been some other one, but I remember I grabbed it because it had Code Veronica on it, like Resident Evil, and I was a big fan of the series, but I didn't have a Dreamcast. So I was like, it poured through that guide and stuff, just like, oh my god, this game looks awesome. I remember that. And then what I do have is when they announced they were canceling Game Informer, I went to GameStop and they had a bunch. So I have a few different ones. I have like the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth one though, because I had to get my boy Sephiroth like just too good. I wasn't sure how Outlaws was going to turn out, but I was like, Star Wars is always good to collect.
Yep.
I grabbed the Hades 2 cover, and then Diablo. But I think I have some more somewhere I set aside, but like I said, a lot of my magazines over the years like got lost, and I might have tossed them out when I was a teenager and stuff. Like, I'm like, I don't need these. Give them away, whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely tore up a bunch. Like, not like tore like angry, but like tore out pages and like put them up as posters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I remember I got grounded for a week and I wasn't allowed to play my games or watch television. So every volume of Nintendo Power that I had to try and like occupy my time, I took the posters out and I put them all over my closet doors. And I had the sliding doors, the huge ones for my closet. So I just filled the whole wall with all those posters. But then when I decided to take them down, they all started to like get ripped and stuff because of the adhesive. And I was like, oh no, what do I do? And they all started to get stuck to each other. So I kind of wish that I might not wanted to have done that, but you know, it occupied my time and it stayed up for a very long 7 years. So,
yep. So I still have a couple of Nintendo Power issues, but the problem is that they're in a bin somewhere in my room, like my closet, and I really need to figure out which ones I still have. Like there's a bunch that I unfortunately don't have anymore. Like we unfortunately had to toss them out due to space, but I regret it, by the way. But anyway, I have the issue where it was issue 250. I believe it was 250, but it was the one that had Mega Man 10 revealed, and it had that really awesome like cover art where it was a recreation of like those bad box arts from the Mega Man. There's that. And it looks like he's about to go get it right now. I had that issue. I had the Mega Man 9 one. I had the Metroid Prime one. I don't know if I still have it when it was first. Like we had Samus with Metroid Prime on the cover, and it had an actual CD, or actually it was a DVD. That it was like a DVD Nintendo Power, where it had like the main focus being Metroid, the history of Metroid, which at the time the newest two games were Metroid Prime and Metroid Fusion. Yes, that one. One.
Yeah, I still have that issue. The disc you're talking about.
Yes, I have the disc somewhere.
I have that disc too.
I don't remember what issue it was, but I did get one that had the Smashing Live Orchestra for Super Smash Brothers Melee. I had that.
I still have that CD.
I have that.
Yeah, that was my favorite.
I have that CD somewhere.
Right
It's in a jewel case somewhere.
I actually have a story about that one real quick.
Okay.
I found the copy sealed at a local retro store and claimed it online, went to get it, and right there in front of them, like, you know, they sold it to me sealed, so I knew the disc was in there. I opened it right in front of them because I bought it to get the CD, and they lost their minds. They were like, if we knew you were going to open it, we wouldn't have sold it to you. And I was like, I wouldn't have bought it if I didn't want. I want to listen to the music.
Yep.
One of the best concert CDs they've made. I was like, I paid for it. Whatever.
Yeah, because I remember getting that, and I've listened to it, and I loved it. Other issues that I had. Let's see. I have a Game Informer issue from 2017 that had all those Mega Man on it, because that was when Capcom announced Mega Man 11, and I was like, yes. So I ended up getting that one. I have like most of the notable issues that I could think of come from Nintendo Power. I had issue 200, I had 250. The last issue, I'm more likely going to go back and try to get some earlier issues. I want to try to get there was the first one that had Street Fighter 2, when Street Fighter 2 was coming out for the Super Nintendo. I want to get that. I want to get like pretty much all the Mega Man issues I don't have. I want to work on that, like, because I think there was Mega Man 2, I know there was Mega Man 3, and pretty much everything. I want to work on trying to get some of those. I want to work on getting different Mega Man issues, different Metroid issues. I want to get Super Metroid. I want to get Metroid Zero Mission. I think I saw Metroid Zero Mission. I think I still have that one, the Prime 3 one. I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't have that one. I would like to get like all the Super Smash Brothers issues I don't have. I believe I have the Brawl one. I don't have Melee because I subscribed afterwards. And I don't have the 64 one. Now, I also have in terms of other notable issues that I can remember having, like all the E3 stuff. Like there was also an issue from I believe it was either Electronic Gaming Monthly. I don't remember if it was Electronic Gaming Monthly or GamePro, one of those two. I want to see if I can try to find out which one it is, but it was like December of 1997. I remember reading that that the history of arcades, but the one thing that stood out was the one thing I remember that stood out was the whole, like, it was where people found out that Gunpei Yokoi passed away because of a car crash, and it said "Farewell, Game Boy." I'm trying to figure out which magazine it was, but I do remember reading about that in an issue. Like I said, I think it was either EGM or GameSpot, but GameStop, not Game Informer. But yeah, I do remember having that. And there was like an EGM issue from like 1993 that I had. And there was an ad that stood out from what I remember. It was a Game Boy ad from Hudson Soft that says, "Just don't smile when they say you're grounded." I'm going to post it in the podcast guest room. So this was an ad right here because they were advertising Game Boy games made by Hudson Soft. And I just found it hilarious. It's like, oh, you can't play your Super Nintendo? No problem. You can play your Game Boy. So you can play some of these games on your Game Boy, like Bonk's Adventure or Felix the Cat and all that stuff. So that's what Hudson was basically advertising. And I remember that ad stood out. I was like, wow. And this was 1993. I did see a lot of weird ads. And what I also remember was like all the ads regarding like different like you would see Konami games, like the way they advertised it with like the big bolded black fonts. You would see Capcom games, like they had like the red border on them back in the day. Whenever you see like Mega Man advertised, or Street Fighter, or any of their other games, like the Disney stuff that they would work on. But speaking of Disney, like I remember reading, like there was this one issue of Nintendo Power that I remember seeing that had Mickey Mouse on it back in 2002, because it was Nintendo, Disney, and Capcom that made that Mickey Mouse game for GameCube that was not really all that great to begin with. But I remember they were hyping that one like as this was, I think it was the first Mickey Mouse game in 3D, like as a platformer. Unfortunately, like I said, didn't really turn out well, but it was one of those things where just seeing like Mickey Mouse grace the cover like that. But you wonder what was the most surreal magazine that I remember reading. I think it was either Official PlayStation Magazine or PSM. It might have been PSM. And this was back in 2001. And I was stunned because that's how I found out that Sega was no longer making Dreamcast games and they were going third party. It said Sega on PS2. I'm like, what? And then I later found out that Sega was making games for Nintendo platforms and on Xbox, because I was going to get a Dreamcast, but that money went to GameCube. And my uncle also surprised us with a PlayStation 2. So that generation, after we got Game Boy Advances, one for each, me and my brother, we were set. We had pretty much everything we needed, except for Xbox. We didn't get Xbox, but yeah, that issue of Nintendo Power that had Sonic, where they were hyping up Sonic Adventure 2, like, just back then, like, the fact that you could actually, it was the fact that you could play Sonic games on a Nintendo platform. That was a big deal, because, like, Sega messed up really hard with the Sega Saturn, and then when the Dreamcast came out, it seemed like everything was going the right direction, but there were a lot of fans that lost trust, and they decided that they were just going to wait for PlayStation 2 instead. Yep. And that's what they did. And not having a DVD player did not help matters whatsoever. If anything, like, that did hurt the Dreamcast. It didn't hurt the GameCube as much, although the GameCube was a distant third place in terms of who did the best at that generation. But yeah, just having Sonic like, just grace the cover of different magazines that you would have never expected him to see, and all of a sudden, this is basically the new normal. You're gonna see Sonic everywhere. Although he was mostly Nintendo at first, and then he would be on PlayStation, Xbox later when Sonic Heroes released. But yeah,
yep,
that was definitely an era right there. Like, I've seen, like, reading the magazines with different eras, like, as some of them would begin or some of them would come to an end. I'm gonna bring up one more, and that's around the time when Nintendo announced the Wii. When Nintendo announced the Wii and the lead up to it, I remember people were not happy with the fact that Nintendo changed the name from Revolution to the Wii, but people were like, but look at these games. We got Super Mario Galaxy coming out. We had Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. We got Red Steel, although Red Steel ended up not being a good game. And what they were showing with the Wii, there was a lot of promise. Combined with the fact that Sony decided that they thought that it was a good idea to charge $599 for PlayStation 3, which would lead to a lot of those games that were meant to be exclusive to PS3 ended up getting ported to 360. Because I think that Assassin's Creed was originally supposed to be a PS3 exclusive, but a lot of companies were like, we're bringing these games to 360 as well. So that generation, I didn't get a PS3 until much later, but I had a Wii, I had a DS, and I had an Xbox 360, and I was pretty much good. Because it's like, the 360 was like $350 to $400, and it was cheaper than the PS3, and you could play most of the same games on there. But then you have the Wii, where it was $250, and then like being able to play the new Zelda, being able to play all these games, Wii Sports, it was a big deal back then. Mm-hmm. So just the build up to the Wii, and also the build up to the Nintendo DS around that time, that was amazing. So yeah, those were some of the more notable issues. Some of them I still have, some of them I don't have anymore. So go ahead.
Add one more thing. You're talking about the ads. I happened to come across, you guys were talking about earlier, for Mega Play.
Yeah.
The Sega version of it.
Yeah.
Just happened to, it's kind of funny seeing that for the Master System. And the other thing that was always advertised in these magazines, everybody had a 1-900 number back then.
Yeah.
I just love that. So
yeah. Right. Yeah, I do remember the 1-900 numbers, because it's one of those things where you you basically call the 1-900 numbers without your parents' permission, and the moment they see that phone bill, they ain't gonna be happy.
Nintendo Gaming Counselor, this is Jeremy. How may I help you today?
I never had the guts to do it. My parents would have killed me.
Nope, me either. Nope. The land of 10,000 nopes.
Yeah. The
I
closest
only
thing I
got
did
permission
was
from my parents one time to call it. But
Yeah.
I was visiting my dad and I printed out a like not even a full guide, just like all the enemy skill locations for Final Fantasy VII, and that was pretty thick. I just printed out a whole game fact thing, and that's the closest I ever did to something like that. Because I didn't get permission. He's like, "Why is there this giant document here?" I'm like, "Oh."
I did the same in college when I finally had my own printer, but I couldn't bring my computer into the living room with me, so I printed out the game whatever FAQ for Legend of Zelda, so I could finally understand how to beat this thing.
Yeah. So
I do
Go
miss
ahead.
that era of ads, like the 90s, 2000s and stuff. Like the
Yeah.
game industry in that time was just so much, it felt like really creative with the ads until like obviously the AAA started with like Final Fantasy VII, where it was really like flashy and like big, but it just back then, just the funny, goofy ads you'd get. Like I was looking at them on Google a little bit. There's just like a Conker's Bad Fur Day one where it's like a crime scene with a teddy bear outline. And that's even for Live and Reloaded. So we already knew what Conker's was at that time. But
Oh,
here's
yeah.
just like,
Red
Look at that.
Steel, you know, the 2-word poem of "You suck."
yeah.
Could have been the review, actually.
2-word bone, you said?
That's what it says. Yeah, the story
It
of,
says it?
story of your fighting is a poem of 2 words. You suck. That's literally what it says.
But
Like
that,
we'd get the reviews and stuff that would show scenes, but then like you just get those really off the wall ads and stuff, and I was just like, I love that. And then there'd be like the ones where they're trying to go for the sex appeal to like for the teenagers, like some hot girl and like playing the video game or something, or just there while the guy's playing it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I feel like there was a really strange 5-year period of advertising for video games, and it happened after the PlayStation 2 came out. And here's my point of view on this. One of the cheapest DVD players to buy in the early 2000s was a PlayStation 2. So you had so many people obtaining this gaming console that they were just using as a DVD player because it was one of the cheapest on market. So you get this curve of gaming culture, pop culture. And it's like every game all of a sudden started to explain to you through tutorials how to play the game.
Yeah.
Because they were trying to bring all these people who bought these consoles, into the world of gaming. So this stretch of advertising went from very niche to how do we break into the pop culture market? How do we get everybody to play? But then all of a sudden, we would like to play. So those kinds of advertising strategies tended to understand, here are now the demographics per console. And now we as magazines can understand who our demographic is based off of this branching from this niche thing that we all kind of agreed upon to, instead of culturing towards a console, culturing towards what type of games you like to play.
yeah.
It's very interesting. It is this 5 or 6 year period where we were just like seeing these splits in what are we talking about with the Game Boy Advance? Why are these 2 people in bed in this Nintendo Power magazine? To explain, please.
Well, what I remember was there was a couple of ads I posted. They were kind of more edgy around this time. Like in the first one I posted was like the late 90s.
Everything was poochy.
What I remember was there was this game called Daikatana, made by Ja Romero of Doom fame and Wolfenstein. And the advertisement says that Ja Romero's about to make you his bitch, and then the game ended up not doing that great. So, like, maybe your edgy advertising wasn't going to work. And then you have SNK came out with a couple of ads hyping up the Neo Geo, and it said you need a set of Ds. There were 2 steel balls to play one of these, and I'm like, yeah, because that was gonna do well. Like that because the Neo Geo was extremely expensive, and the cartridges were like $200 to $300 back then. The console was like $600 something dollars, and they also had another ad where it said, if you're still playing Sega NEC being TurboGrafx, or Nintendo, you're nothing but a weenie. But if you're playing in the incredibly high-powered Neo Geo system, you're a real hot dog. Which, like, back then, like, just the ads that they were coming out with, it's like, it's just the culture, how they were back then. But obviously now, like, a lot of us move past that. We look at it and see how ridiculous it was. Like, there was some ads that were cool. There were some ads that were fun. But some of them just, like, but those were the ones that were just a bit extreme. But they get the point across. But
yeah, and you know what's interesting is that that type of advertising actually did disservice to one of the finest games on the Super Nintendo, Earthbound, because it was advertised as "this game stinks,"
yes.
and they had those scratch and sniff cards and everything, and it just did a huge disservice to the heart of the game. So. But we have these magazines now to say, hey, you know, like, this type of advertising will not work for something with this much heart. So whoever was on the marketing at Nintendo at that time, I mean, I don't know, but there's a fine line to draw between who does your advertising and who you're talking to about marketing this game.
Exactly.
You know, because you have advertising companies, and then you have the people who are marketing these games. And if the two of them don't mix well, you're not going to get something that's going to sell your product in a way that's conducive to what the game is really all about.
Because back then Nintendo had the Play It Loud campaign, and the type of marketing they were doing with Earthbound was reminiscent to, like, the gross out humor that started with Ren and Stimpy, and everybody wanted a piece of the pie. Nintendo was no exception to that. So they ended up doing those scratch and sniff cards and all the advertising and everything. And I agree, it did a disservice to that game, but that's not the only time Nintendo did that. There was another game, though not in a magazine ad, but a commercial. And the commercial was for Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island, where there was this guy that just kept eating and eating and eating and eating until he exploded. And
the Monty Python reference.
Yeah, it was a Monty Python reference. Like, it would have sucked if that would have turned people off from buying the game back then, which the game is amazing. Like, in my personal opinion, one of the best platformers on the Super Nintendo. But just and the thing is, there were two versions of that ad. The version one of that ad, you see the guy explode. Version two, they cut to the scene where you see all the goop just go into the walls and the console, the game itself, and other people, because it was just too gross. So, and
I actually had mentioned this in chat earlier that I actually got to meet Gail Tilden, who was the editor-in-chief and the chief designer for the original first few issues of Nintendo Power.
Yeah.
And speaking to her and how she had to really hammer down to the Japanese advertisers and the Japanese magazine designers, like, no, this is what America needs. This is what it wants. Another 8 years from there, it had to change, and it changed for a way that was not conducive to advertising something that in Japan would be seen as, oh, it's Yoshi, it's a very cute character, look at this beautiful, vibrant, colorful world. And everything here in the States was Poochie, you know, so everything was, you know, the hip hop kitty from Gangsta City, and you know what I mean. So and what the American advertisers tried to do is they tried to cater to that edgy audience by thinking of the simplest thing. What does Yoshi like to do? Eat. And then they all became yes people, and they all just ran with it, and they filmed it, and they put it out as fast as possible. And it wasn't necessarily the greatest way to do long-lasting impact for what we now understand as a very technically amazing video game with a Super FX microchip, mind you. You know, so, you know, advertising that probably alongside Star Fox coming out just previously would have probably serviced it more. But again, that's commercial. But in print, you can totally tell a different story, and that story we now have preserved, and
Yes.
it's a beautiful thing that we have that. It's just cool to look back and see, where we went right, where we went wrong, what we could have done, what our sensibilities were as a culture, as a society. It's pretty awesome.
Yep. It pretty much just shows exactly just where we came from, like back then versus where we are now, and the type of ads that we've had in magazines. I've seen the most weirdest ads for games, and some of them kind of turned me off, but then there were some that I'm like, yeah, I want to get this game. And there was, and then it's like, I remember seeing ads for, like, there was a game I wanted, and I'm glad I did not buy this game. My mom kept telling me no, even though I was a fan of this series. And I'm glad that she told me no, because it turned out the game was actually awful. And that game was South Park Chef's Love Shack for the PS1 and N64 and all that. And I've seen YouTube videos of that. My mom had the right idea, because that game was not good. Not the first time that she told me no to a game that ended up not being good, but but one thing I remember, I just want to bring up one thing before we go to the next thing, in general. What I remember was back in 2007, like, there was a shift in Nintendo Power and who was managing it. It was shifting from Nintendo of America to Future Publishing, because this was around the time where Gail Tilden left Nintendo of America, and Nintendo ended up licensing Nintendo Power to Future Publishing, which they would have for the next 5 years. I know this because I remember I was going to get the strategy guide for The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass. They actually advertised it, but they ended up canceling that because by the time, like, because I did place an order for that so that they could send it to me as my free gift for subscribing, and then they apologized to me for that because Nintendo Power was no longer doing strategy guides, and Nintendo Power also, like, was no longer being made by Nintendo of America. They were just licensing it. So it was a completely different shift, but I remember that one. And I was a bit disappointed, but at the same time, like, I was still subscribed. Like, they said that if you were subscribed already, you were still going to be subscribed. It wasn't going to change anything other than the fact that it's no longer from NOA. So there's that. But now we'll go into the next thing before we do the community questions. How much have video game magazines influenced you and the type of games you were into? And RGB, we're going to go with you first.
Oh man, like, I think that Nintendo Power probably influenced me the most with, like, getting into RPGs. Like, I remember as a kid, like, hearing about, like, oh, these what the heck's an RPG, like, and I think that was probably, around like 2001. You hear more about, like, war RPGs and stuff. So you're like, what? How is this pertaining to gaming? But I think like what really sold me, like, on the Paper Mario series, for instance, was I remember when that first came out on in Nintendo Power, and I was like, well, this game looks kind of cool. Like, I got to figure out what this RPG stuff is, and so I, like, kind of really influenced me to get heavily more into RPGs than action adventure, because that was kind of what I mostly stuck to. But yeah, then I, like, the Paper Mario series became one of my all-time favorites. Love, like, the first 3 games. The other ones are pretty good too. I know that a lot of them, like Sticker Star, gets a lot of hate, and I kind of get a little bit of minor hate for liking Sticker Star just a little bit.
I liked it.
Okay.
You're not alone. I liked it.
But I feel like that was kind of what the most influence that Nintendo Power had on me was that I always really enjoyed, like, reading all the letters and stuff too. That kind of swayed me toward some things too, with, like, other people's opinions. Some people were, like, way out there, and others were like, okay, yeah, I kind of get this guy, or whatever type of thing. But I remember another one was I just jumped out of my head. Wind Waker. Man, when that game first came out, like, that had, like, so much hate. Like, oh, what'd they do with the graphics and blah blah blah, and and then you, like, read the not the strategy guide, but, like, the Nintendo Power article, and you're like, wow, this actually kind of looks like a pretty cool game. Like, I might actually have to get into this. And I remember at the time, I had a buddy. He would always get like all the other cool games, and I kind of got mostly stuck to like Mario and that. And we'd like trade. He would not let me borrow his Wind Waker copy. I was so mad at him. Same with Metroid Prime and Animal Crossing, because I was like, man, I want to know what these games are about. He's like, no, man, like I'm playing all three at once, and I'm like, how can you play 3 games at once?
Yep.
But yeah, it was kind of fun. I didn't really get into those series till later, but yeah, that was pretty much my long-winded answer to that, I suppose.
Oh yeah. Now for Nostalgia Alchemist, your turn. How much have video game magazines influenced you and the type of games that you were into?
That is a excellent question. It is difficult to look back now after having 19 years of YouTube as your ability to see where to go next. So for me, being a heavily platform gamer based person when I was in my youth into my early teen years. So I'm 39 now. So I literally just turned 39. So just to kind of give you a scope of like where I am in this.
Yeah.
I think it influenced my ability to be bold into exploring role-playing games, because when I was a kid, I would watch my friends play games like Chrono Trigger, Secret of Mana, Final Fantasy 3, 6, but I would never fully put my hands on it. And then when I saw that Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars was releasing, Nintendo Power influenced me to say, you can do this. Like, we're going to baby step you into learning how RPGs work. And I got it. And I read everything that I could on Mario RPG through Nintendo Power. And that switched me over to understanding how much of a story-driven impact that role-playing games had. And I never really considered that after having a lifetime of puzzles games, racing games, platforming games. You know, it's for me as a child, looking back now, I was after the get the high score era.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't about that anymore. It was about how do you get from start to finish. And that start to finish was all mapped out, all laid out. I memorized arrows. I memorized which bosses were true and fake in Mega Man 6. You know, like those kinds of visuals, they stick in my mind like pictures, you know, because they literally are. This is literally what we're doing. We're literally looking at pictures. And seeing now that I don't have to be afraid of numbers and that I can use that math to my advantage helped me to progress in a way that is befitting of telling a great story. So magazines were able to give me a sense of not only great abilities to understand reading comprehension a little bit better or a little bit more finite, but to understand that there are more ways of stories to be told. And studying acting and performance and being heavily driven by dance, I understood the gravity of a different kind of storytelling medium. So for something that didn't require my body and literally required my imagination and my visual ability to take in those pictures, it was really beautiful looking back now, because my son now reading Nintendo Force, I encourage him to look at these pictures and just be like, this is what we had, and this is all we had. So that's not to take away what is available now to us. I mean, look, we all broadcast, you know, so who am I to say like what's good or bad? But what I'm saying is that there is a very conducive way of receiving information, and preserving that ability to receive that information is vital and crucial to us telling a story. And so that kind of impact was very important to me as a performer, and being able to say, you know, for those who say video games, the story comes second, does it really have to? I think magazines prove that wrong for me.
All right. McPatches?
For me, I was already into RPGs when I started like really getting into the reading magazines. Like I started with like Final Fantasy 7 when I was in like third, kind of dipping my toes into like third grade or so. So my reading wasn't 100% there to the level that you needed for those games, but I was already into it by the time I started really getting into the magazine. So I think the gaming influence was probably pushing me to like see these other genres that I didn't really play. Like I was more interested in a lot of the horror games that I didn't get to play at the time. So I've played a lot of them now, and I was always like interested in started getting more of those as I was getting a little bit older. I also dipped my toes more into like shooters back in the day. Like I remember Time Splitters, the ads made me really want to play those games. So I was like, remember picking that up at a retro game store, like, or just a game store back then. They weren't retro yet. But then the other thing is like the demo discs that came with like the PlayStation magazine and stuff, having like music on them, and then later music videos that influenced my music taste to a fair extent, like introducing me to bands I probably would have never checked out, and like genres of music that I had like, because when you're a kid, to the fair extent, the only music you're really exposed to is like what your parents listen to or like family. But
Yep.
yeah, so
And maybe
I think,
Crush 40.
Yeah, Crush 40.
I think for me, the bigger impact beyond gaming the magazines brought was music taste. That combined with Tony Hawk, those games had a great soundtracks.
Oh yeah,
Absolutely.
indeed. ZensPath.
So gaming magazines for me played a couple roles in what I do now and kind of how my life went in regards to. I was really young whenever I first ran into like Nintendo Power and started seeing more of these magazines. We were talking like early elementary age, and that kind of helped reading some of the articles or seeing, you know, what things were coming out, understanding that that little gray box that I would play with that I had gotten, you know, that Christmas wasn't just a toy. It came from another country, and other people could play it in different ways, and there was, you know, more things to look forward to. So I would kind of expand, oh, okay, well, this game is, you know, looks like they were talking about it's going to be coming out. When could that be? I'm getting more of an understanding of the time of looking for these things. And then when I'm wanting to talk to other people, it helped kind of build a vocabulary of talking about gaming, of understanding bits and pixels and, you know, how these games are made and how they work. And, you know, a lot of the magazines would go into detail talking about some of those things. And, you know, that's what I would use as my weapon to explain to my parents why I needed a Super Nintendo, why I should save up and get an N64, why, you know, things like that. Or arguing with my cousin why the Super Nintendo was better than the Genesis. And, you know, it was just arming for that fight. And it, you know, that vocabulary is something I still use to this day. And then going into engineering, all of that kind of makes a lot more sense, and building onto it from there. It also just kind of invited more people, because with the magazines, I didn't have the subscriptions all the time. But as kids, we would get them and everyone would group together and be reading them and trading them back and forth. So it was kind of, you know, there were not very many shows on TV that might be talking about gaming or electronics. We didn't even have E3 at the time, you know, things like that. We didn't, what the hell's the internet?
Yeah.
We barely knew what long distance calls were when I was a kid.
Yep.
They were there. I just didn't know. So it helped build a community around that, where we would get these new topics to talk about, and it would come every month. And, you know, whoever, you know, we had the rich kids that would get these things and had the big Nintendo collections, and they would kind of sprinkle it down to the rest of us to see what was going on. So yeah, magazines were a massive thing for that. And then now, talking about, like, I have 3 kids. They're all grown now. My youngest is 19 years old. And we still will go back and look at the old magazines and use those like a time capsule. So they still have that reference for them to go back and see where things come from. I think one of you was talking about were trying to learn to read with Final Fantasy VII, and I'm sitting there going, I taught my kids to read with Pokemon Blue. So with a Game Boy, I taught both my boys to read.
I'm doing that now with Mario RPG Remake.
games
Right.
are such a great tool to get kids to read. They're
Yeah.
so intrigued with it, and yeah.
Mhm.
So magazines are something that, in some form or another, I hope still continue, because it is a physical time capsule for us to get. The internet can go away very easily. We're finding out badly with Game Informer, with their whole history just being wiped out
Yeah.
over such a stupid decision, that, you know, us having these, yeah, people are like, oh, you're hoarding and collecting magazines, but these are going to be important for different things, for historical purposes beyond us. So I'm glad there's people that are working to scan and keep these as best we can and kind of share them. And that's the biggest thing. Like, people, we have our magazines and people want to hoard them and not do it. I think the best thing is to share them with as many people, let them be read, bring people over and look at them and talk about those things. So
Oh yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All those were great answers. So for me, well, in terms of how much they influenced me and the type of games I'm into, well, it got me into trying out different video game series. If anything, I would say video game magazines definitely helped push me into liking Mega Man more than I already did. It also pushed me to try out different series. If anything, it pushed me to like Metroid more, or just like in Metroid period. It pushed me to get more into Zelda. It got me to more into these games that I'm not sure how much I would have been into, but just reading them across multiple magazines. Like, I remember, if anything, just getting hyped up for finally getting Dragon Ball Z games in North America in the 2000s. And then when I played Dragon Ball Z: The Legacy of Goku, that game ended up not being so great, but Dragon Ball Z Budokai was. So that was at least something that I was happy to have. Being able to try them out, plus reading about them, showing them to friends, and then friends would get into them too. And I was like, yeah, like, just seeing people play the same games that I'm interested in just made me really happy. But with these magazines, learning new information, and also information about games you've known about for years that you otherwise would have never known about, it's like, wow, this is actually really cool. And it's like, for example, in 2006, when Nintendo was doing like a brief history of Mario leading up to New Super Mario Bros. For the DS, and they showed like a brief timeline of what came out for each year. And then when they got to 1993, it's like Super Mario Bros. Movie, like the one with John Leguizamo and Bob Hoskins. It's like, yes, it happened. Let us speak no more of it. They actually said that in the magazine. They quickly acknowledged it just to be like, to brush it off. I was like, oh, and the next thing after that is we got Super Mario 64 and all that stuff. But learning new information, learning and just finding something that I think is really cool, plus all the fun stuff that they used to have in the magazines. And if anything, because it got me into, if anything, just, I remember back in the late 90s, during the N64 and PS1 era, like this, it actually, reading these magazines was what got me more into wanting to play certain games that I ended up being interested in. And I was heavily into fighting games during the late 90s. So reading up about like when Marvel vs. Capcom 1 was coming out to the arcades, when I was reading up about like that there was a chibi fighting game that has Street Fighter characters called Super Gem Fighter Mini Mix, or in Japan it was known as Pocket Fighter, which is what they called it on PS1. Reading that, reading about like Tekken 3 and how great that game was going to be, reading about Soul Calibur for Dreamcast, Soul Calibur 2 for the GameCube, PS2, and Xbox, where each version had a unique character exclusive to their games. Like in the case of GameCube, I have the GameCube version where you play as Link. And seeing people talk about how Sega going into third party resulted in like Sega splitting up their library of games across multiple platforms. Seeing that was absolutely a mind-blowing experience for me. How we had an era of games where we were moving away from standard definition and going into high definition, but Nintendo still kept standard definition with the Wii because they weren't doing HD yet until when the Wii U came out. Seeing how we went from 2D to 3D. And I remember the jump from PS1 to PS2, and then they were trying to hype PS2 up as like, oh, these games are going to eventually look like Toy Story 1, like the movie, which they didn't.
Yep.
But if anything, PS3 was closer to that than PS2 ever was, but still didn't quite hit that. And yeah, like we're between Lost Arts, as was mentioned, as well as the fact that this is history, and again, we get these magazines to preserve history, and the problem is that we're getting to a point where making everything digital is going to get to the point where they could just take it away. You're never going to see it again, and it's scary. Like what happened with Game Informer, like a lot of people who were working there found out about the announcement that Game Informer was done at the exact same time that a lot of the consumers found out. And there were people who were taking trips and they did not get Wi-Fi for hours. And then the moment they found out, that was how they found out they lost their job. It's very shitty how like that just happened. But you have these people that cared so much about the fans. They wanted to make a magazine for the fans. And then the CEOs, like the executives, were like, we're just pulling the plug. And they made like the most soulless, the most soulless apology and soulless farewell message, which was actually written by AI. And there was also someone who still had access to the Game Informer Twitter account, refuse to call it X. So someone had access to the Twitter account for Game Informer, and they posted an actual real heartfelt apology and an actual farewell that was actually very emotional. And then GameStop caught wind of it and deleted it, and I think they shut the account down.
Yep.
It's messed up that they did that because it was real people who lost their jobs, and they want to at least make a proper goodbye to the fans, and then even that was taken away. That just shows how much they actually care about their own legacy, in which, spoiler alert, they don't. And I found out, I just recently found out that a lot of them barely even got a chance to get any props or like some other merch that they had like from behind the scenes, that when they were trying to get rid of stuff, they were just going to throw a lot of that stuff away. It's
They grabbed a bunch of managers from the local areas, brought them in, and they just took everything. It ended up in stores and personal collections, trash cans. Like it was a mess.
Yeah. So my thing is this, like at the very least, at least with Nintendo Power, there was a warning that it was ending. I will at least say that much. Game Informer, there was no warning. Like, and some of them were abrupt because they either went out of business, or a lot of them just pulled the plug for whatever reason. Like Game Informer was just the worst out of that because that's the most current one. They were like the last bastion of mainstream video game magazines, and now it's gone. Yep. So when people talk about the old saying that you don't know what you got until it's gone, it's 100% true here, because we talk about how we have video game magazines for so many years, and many people, myself included, I'm guilty of this. We took it for granted, and here we are right now. But no matter what happens, the legacy will always live on, and I'm grateful to have been a part of the era where we got to read these magazines to learn about upcoming games, and also being influenced to try different things. So they influenced my taste because like they just had the type of games I'm loved, and I'm grateful for it. So let's do the community questions. So we're gonna start off with Dari, who asks, what gaming magazines would you rather have subscribed to and have sent to you if you had the choice back in the day? Well, I would not change Nintendo Power, but I would have changed Game Informer and replaced it with either GamePro or Electronic Gaming Monthly during that time instead of Game Informer. But I would not have changed Nintendo Power at all. That's my answer.
Yeah, that would be my answer as well. Perhaps Electronic Gaming Monthly. GamePro. I got turned off to GamePro because a lot of the kids that bullied me had GamePro, so maybe that just turned me off, being like, oh, they're those types of people. So I didn't really understand at 10 what I was talking about or thinking, but I digress. But probably Electronic Gaming Monthly for me if I had a choice. I remember reading as a kid that I liked their spin on things. I liked their tutorials. I liked how they tried to give things a fair chance for the most part. And I also got to learn a little bit about PC gaming from Electronic Gaming Monthly.
Yes.
So, yeah, I would probably also do that magazine subscription. But I chose Disney Adventures. So, not a complete loss.
Not a bad magazine, to be honest.
EGM was worth it. It was a good one to have because I always did like the fact that they were really good about having multiple people review stuff. So even if one person didn't like it, you would see either why they did or they'd have to debate about it. And it was kind of nice. But Nintendo Power, I would like to have gotten it earlier instead of having to scrounge and kind of fight for it. I would have loved to have gotten that at the get-go because that's back when I was playing the games, which would have been great. But thankfully, I was able to get most of the magazines I was wanting to get. Dreamcast One, Xbox, EGM through a good chunk of its run, things like that. I got Game Informer later, which was nice to at least have, but kind of went back and forth. But thankfully, I got lucky on that part.
I think I definitely wouldn't have changed it on Nintendo Power, but I think I would have liked to have subscribed to Sega Visions. I honestly didn't even hear about that magazine till it was long gone, but I was mostly a Nintendo kid. I did have a Genesis, but I think I could have probably got more into the Genesis if I, also had like the Nintendo Power equivalent in my arsenal, and I'm like, oh shoot, this game's coming out. This game looks kind of cool, or that type of thing. And I don't even know how long Sega Visions went on for. I don't think it was very long. I mean, well, obviously compared to Nintendo Power, but it would have been kind of a nice subscription to have.
Well, Sega Visions lasted from 1990 to 1995.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
it was a long time, but not a very long time compared to others, I guess.
Yeah.
Sounds like you'll get about 60 volumes if they released it monthly.
Yeah.
Just about.
Yeah. I was okay with the ones I did get. With hindsight, maybe like Nintendo Power, but I wasn't very big into Nintendo as a kid. So into like Sega and then PlayStation.
Yeah.
At my home, I had the NES, but then, looking like if without like now's knowledge, maybe I would have liked to have like EGM and stuff to have a bigger like audience, or whatever, bigger direction.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So next up is from Mr. Ben. Do you miss having physical print media? Why or why not? Yes, because like I said, it's all about preserving history.
Yeah, the physical feel of having the magazines is also kind of a nice thing. That I like flipping through the pages, and you get that more visual, like folding out the posters or the large, print stuff and things like that. I'm kind of the same way with comic books. Like you can see the giant wall of comics. That's just part of it.
I was going to ask which limbs you had in which boxes, but
Yeah, that's one wall. There's more than one. So yeah, the physical will always kind of be nice for that. Digital is convenient for, holding on to libraries of it or kind of research or sharing with people. But the magazines themselves, you're never going to have as much, of a feel of just the turning of those pages, hearing that and feeling it. So
yeah. Well, and there's more that comes with it too, like in that preservation thing, like we were talking about the ads. and like those bubbles of time where we have like certain types of ads that are prominent and stuff. Like that preservation is definitely something that I think in hindsight society will look back on and be like, damn, this physical media was actually a lot better than we gave it credit.
Yep.
And beyond this, like we look at, there's so many movies and games and stuff that are lost, like just out there now, that we're like, we know it exists and we have like some records of it, but we don't have easy access like copies and stuff to be able to share. And I'm okay with digital media, but I'm a very like big advocate for physical, and I still do my part to support it as much as possible. Even waiting 2 months to play new games because the digital comes out sooner. Freaking Dead Rising and more Marvel vs. Capcom.
Yes.
But yeah, definitely a big fan of physical media.
Yeah.
Not only do you lose a lot of all that stuff, but like the actual physical artwork that they always included in all this stuff, it's amazing. You don't find it anywhere else. Like the Mario 3 guide that you showed earlier, Alchemist, there's a lot of Mario 3 artwork you don't find anywhere else except that guide and I think a coloring book. That's about the only place I've ever seen all that artwork too, you know?
Yep.
But
I can't remember what it is.
And they had a lot, like Game Informer. They look at this. This is friggin' awesome artwork. I don't think I've ever seen this Breath of the Wild one anywhere else.
We got some of the crazy stuff like, the
These are
customized Game Boy stuff. Like that's never going to show up in anything else. No,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Even like all the guides that Nintendo Power put out, like that had so much custom artwork that you only see in those guides. Like that was one of the main reasons I even would buy a guide back in the day, because everybody would be like, "Why are you buying a guide? Just play the game." And I'm like, "Yeah, but it's cool." And then you get all the backstory behind characters and stuff, that too. But
Yeah.
it's incredible.
There was some character recently, like there's a character that everybody's trying to figure out if it was like something that was in early development or something, but it was just like in one of the magazines talking about like a fighting game. I think I just saw it. I don't remember the name. It was on Twitter. I happened to like scroll and see that they ended up finding the original artist, and he's like, "Oh yeah, no, that was just something I drew that was like reminded me of these characters and stuff. Like it's not an actual official thing, but it's like one of those things that we lost. We lose all that little extra elements to."
Yep.
Like this one, they were talking about like how they designed the Street Fighter character, showing the original art for some of them. It's kind of hard to get in focus, but
Yep. Though
Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say that they did put those in the Street Fighter 30th anniversary collection. Like all the concept arts for the characters, because there were multiple pictures of Street Fighter 2.
right.
Because there was the
Some
first
of
one.
it.
There was the first one where they were going to go to some sort of island. There was like 7 to 8 characters. It was a completely different cast, no Ryu or Ken. And then the second pitch, they were going to add Ryu and Ken, and then they had like different versions of all these characters. And Ryu was going to look like how he looked like from Street Fighter 1, where he had like the long red hair and the sandals and everything. But Nostalgia Alchemist, you were going to say something?
Yes. If everyone doesn't mind me getting personal for just a little bit of your time.
Go right ahead.
Fine.
This is one of the oldest video gaming magazines that I own.
Yep.
Electronic Games. And this is from September of 1983. And RGB, I'm extremely happy that you have brought up unique artwork in magazines. My uncle had passed away in January of 2020 from cancer. And my aunt and my father were going through his personal belongings. He has a very storied and puzzle-pieced history of graphic design, of art, and probably the greatest fusion jazz pianist in the Northeast.
Nice.
But I was broadcasting the reception of getting these magazines one day. This specific issue I actually had a copy of and was extremely proud to give it to somebody named Ash Said Hi, who is a Twitch ambassador and also the retro queen of Twitch.
Yep.
So in this magazine, I was reading and looking through all of the very unique styles of art and seeing what kinds of articles that they put out, sweepstakes, photos. And then as I got to the end of the volume, I said to myself, you know what? Wouldn't it be interesting if I saw who worked on the magazine? Before I do that, I'd like to see if I can find this here. There was an article about the very first Space Invader video game contest that took place that we actually heard about in the Netflix miniseries called High Score. And it mentions Heinemann, who actually won the whole thing, who has since become Rebecca Heinemann. They had changed genders and unfortunately had lost a loved one recently, but I can't quite find it. However, what I did find was looking in the credits for the magazine, I found a section of visual artists. And one of those visual artists just happened to be my uncle, Frank Emmy, who was married into the family. And you can't quite see it, but all the way at the bottom, they labeled them as illustrators. And amongst these illustrators was my uncle. So in my hands, I now hold a piece of family history that is coinciding with video game history.
Nice.
And going back to the question at hand.
Nice.
Yes, physical. Always physical.
Yeah.
In a world where we can have things taken away and stripped away from us by conglomerates and by those who wouldn't necessarily care about preservation and only about a bottom dollar, I will remind you of this. The Greeks burned the Library of Alexandria. And all of that human history was lost, even before we could even have a tangible idea of what came before. The Internet Library, what is it called?
Internet Archive.
Yes, the Internet Archive is now under scrutiny because of something called copyright.
Yeah.
ChatGPT, OpenAI are now under scrutiny because, according to them, we only did it because it was already available to the public. I can't walk up to your car and say, that's in the public. It's mine now. Like, this car is in the general public. No.
Right.
This is preservation. It is copyright. It is human work. It is pieces of history.
Mm-hmm.
And we are so privileged to be able to utilize our human and whatever given talents to be able to create things that last lifetimes, that last memories, that consist of family, that consist of friendship. And this is my proof that whatever takes hold in the digital age that is still to come, I will still back and I will still back it up, and I will stand at the precipice of a cliff and say, you need artists. You will be boring without them.
Yep.
I will say though, I will totally download a car if it's possible.
Yep.
But yeah, so that is my hidden gem for the evening. Thank you for allowing me to share that story, everyone.
Yeah,
No problem. No problem. No problem.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, exactly. So the next one is from Dragonflame. Are you digitally subscribed to any game magazines that have gone defunct? Actually, not sure how many they are. No. Big.
Nintendo Force, but it's not defunct. It's still happening.
Yeah.
PDFs are still available in the Internet Archives, as far as I'm concerned. So I would say if you are so robust in your hard drive's ability to store information, yeah, sure, go search for PDFs, search for scans. You can even if you have some kind of a skill, I was saying this before we went live, that if you have a skill like photography, or if you just enjoy sitting and scanning things, like if you find something or somebody to talk to about video games and you find this hidden thing, take a picture of it, take down some notes on what the person has to say about it, and send it to a foundation such as the Video Game History Foundation. One of our guests, in some way, shape, or form, Forum knows Kelsey Lewin. I had met Frank Cifaldi. So there are people out there who are willing to take in that information, even if it is defunct, and be able in some way, shape, or form or another share it so that we can understand the histories, because a lot of game code is gone. A lot of the hardware is gone. And the only thing we have left is the written word and pictures.
Exactly.
And that's why these magazines are so important.
Exactly. I will say I have met Kelsey. Because she was at New York one time, like for an Animal Crossing event in Nintendo New York when it was Nintendo World, and this was before she was part of the Video Game History Foundation. It was around the time where she was part of, was it Game Gorilla or Pink Gorilla?
Pink Gorilla.
Pink Gorilla, yes.
Games,
Yeah,
Yes.
she's still co-owner.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I don't have anything that's defunct.
Yeah, I never got into digital magazines. Like, I go onto the websites and look at articles and stuff. But for the most part, I get a lot of my gaming news through friends or just like social media posts about it now.
Yeah.
YouTube, a lot of YouTube.
YouTube, yes.
I kind of wanted to get into those like Nintendo Power podcast things that they got. Do they even still do that? I don't know.
They
It's kinda hard
actually
for me to get into.
they actually ended it last year. With
Tears of the Kingdom.
Tears of the Kingdom was the last one, yeah. Which I'm actually shocked that it lasted as long as it did. I actually thought that it would have been like a short-term thing.
Yeah, well, the pandemic hit, and that's what they had. So I guess they were just able to still go through with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and, like, it's funny how many of those things are being canceled now by companies when it's like the pandemic showed that there is still times when those are important to have. Like,
Yeah.
Things like what we're doing right now are important. Because
Exactly.
we're able to share stories. We're able to show who is interconnected. These are important things.
They are.
well, and like with physical media and stuff, like when your internet goes down, you have those. Like, I still have a movie collection, and it's so nice when the internet's acting up to be able to like still have something to watch. Like, you know.
And Candle still exists, so there's
Candle still exists. Yep. Let's see. Ice Pig asks, were you guys more into magazines for news updates on upcoming games or other topics like cheat codes or import related news?
This was a good question.
Yes, a very good
I
question.
have to get something. Hold on, then you guys talk about that.
Okay. So what I'll say is this. I personally, like, for me, it's basically all of the above. Just learning everything that there is to learn regarding these magazines. So all the above for me, because learning about imported games, what Japan was into, especially considering the fact that there were some really cool games that have never left Japan, even to this day. Many of them did finally leave Japan. Like, there was one series that never left Japan for the longest time, and it took until 2001 when Super Smash Bros. Melee had these two characters, and that series being Fire Emblem. Fire Emblem has since released a lot of games, like released games outside Japan, and though at first they weren't selling too well, to the point where after Shadow Dragon, when New Mystery of the Emblem remake released in Japan, didn't come out here because Shadow Dragon did poorly and it was not well received. But when Awakening came out, when it finally did, that was what saved the series. Like, if Awakening sold poorly worldwide, that would have been it. But Awakening was what saved the series, and now Fire Emblem is much bigger than ever before.
Yeah.
But learning about imports, there was a lot of really cool niche games. Plus, a lot of sometimes they would go into history, like a short, brief history of certain topics, like arcades. Learning about how there used to be this big boom for arcades. In 1980 was when Pac-Man came out, and 81 was when Galaga came out, Miss Pac-Man, and Donkey Kong.
Yeah.
And then also reading about the video game crash of 1983, which blew my mind of how, like, that affected a lot of things. It got to the point where nobody wanted video games until Nintendo came in.
I mean,
So-
the volume that I just showed you was from September of '83. That magazine came out in the thick of all of that, and they were still trying to push all of these consoles. And it's just incredible how they still were trying to do these sweepstakes. It's quite remarkable.
Yeah, and I'll say this. I've entered multiple sweepstakes. You want to know how many of them I've won? 0.
Same.
I kind of won one.
Which one?
Hey.
Pikachu Beetle. I actually still have all the paperwork and stuff for it. It was partially through one of the gaming magazines in the Cartoon Network. But it was one of the Pikachu Beetles. I've got all the paperwork for it and everything. Like, we were getting to the point we had the car's information, we had filed for insurance, done all that stuff, and they contacted us, and they knew where I lived. I'm in Panama City, Florida, and ended up saying, "Hey, well, we're making it invalid in Florida. Sorry, you can't have it." And they sent me a letter. I have letterhead from them, from Cartoon Network and Nintendo and them, explaining it and apologizing. And they sent me a box of like advertisement stuff with it. I still have all the paperwork. I framed it because at this point it's hilarious. I thought about reaching out to the Video Game Foundation if that would be something they'd be interested in having. Is that all that documentation and paperwork from it? Because it's the emails back and forth, all of it. I mean, I remember being at work when I got the call. I almost got fired because they told me to get off the phone.
Yeah.
Almost crying because we needed the car at the time. We were young, married. My car was crap at the time. That Beetle would have been great. And it had the N64 on the back of it too, which would have been funny.
Funny enough, like, we bring up sweepstakes because that was actually our next question.
Well, but before we get to that one, I'm sorry. What I had to get, you were asking about the influence of the magazines.
Yeah.
This is what it was. This was what I would do. It was nothing but a code book of all the cheat codes I would put in there and find from the magazines.
Nice.
Artwork that I drew. And even these ended up becoming kind of a touchstone for the time of like the short one-page list of all the games I had. I even have lists of the CDs I had at the time. But it's decades of all of my video games I played and all the cheat codes and everything as I played through it. And I had high hopes. I said it was the first book. It was not. But but I keep this forever about, gaming related stuff from magazines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where it all came
That's
from.
awesome.
I have those
yeah,
two.
that's good,
I have those two. You are such a Jeremy.
I was here first. You learned this from me.
Amazing. I love it.
But yeah.
I think the gaming news was probably the biggest draw for me, but the cheat codes were like close second, and then like the strategy guides and stuff, because I didn't have the internet like a computer with internet and stuff at home through most of my life growing up. It wasn't until like I was in my teens and like, out and about all the time anyways, I really had access to a computer and internet at home. But so like those guides were like timeless, like, because I couldn't look things up. So it's like having it there, just like, heck yeah. And then the cheat codes were nice for fun for games like Grand Theft Auto and stuff, where it's way more fun to cheat.
Yep.
But the game news was great because we didn't really have YouTube until I was in high school. So there wasn't as easy, constant access to game news back then outside of magazines.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think when I of course loved all the above as well, tips and tricks and all that. But what I really looked forward to, and it kind of translates to the Nintendo Power Redeem on my channel, is the letters. Because like I said, I grew up like 9 miles out of town. I really didn't have very many gaming friends at all, and just to see like the opinions of others and just realize how big the gaming community was, like that was kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
And it was, you didn't have internet, you didn't have message boards, none of that stuff. Having like people write in letters and send their physical artwork and all that sort of stuff, it was huge. And that definitely was probably one of the biggest things I looked forward to every month, receiving Nintendo Power.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the letters that came in because, back in the 90s, even the early 80s, people were still heavily bullied for liking specific types of things, specifically
Exactly.
video games. If you, I'm from Queens, so I'm still in the city, so it's not
Yeah.
like it's a small town mentality. But I mean, if you come from a small town, I would gather that, you know, not being into sports and only being into like technology and video games was seen as a nerd thing, right?
yeah.
So
Yeah.
you know, you have this like hidden, like almost like this underground community of people who might even be writing it anonymously into these magazines and just sharing all of that with each other. Those are quite magical things. But also just to see how excited everybody else was for those news bits to come out and asking those questions and saying, hey, do you have any more information on what is happening at E3? But yeah, for my money, it was definitely the news, definitely what is to come, what is coming next, what are the game forecasts. That was definitely huge for me. And then when there were new games being featured in the magazines, I had actually dropped this in chat earlier that kudos to the magazine writers and editors for having to transfer walkthroughs from 2D environments to 3D environments. You couldn't rotate and scale the map to show where to go next. You had to try to figure out and tell them, hey, you're gonna see this, and actually make it like you're giving somebody map directions and say you're gonna go to the right of this whatever and actually use landmarks. And it's it was interesting to see how all of that transitioned. So that was quite interesting to realize. But yeah, again, the news and seeing all those letters coming in and the artwork on the envelopes too. That was awesome to see how people just wanted to express their love for something, and sometimes the only way to do it was to send it to a place where it would be appreciated.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, so now the next thing is Clark asks the following 3 questions. We're going to start with this one. Did you guys ever win or enter any sweepstakes? If so, when did you win or enter? None. I know you already talked about yours, Zen, but none for me. Like, I've entered multiple. One of the more notable ones that I've entered, well, there was some contests just winning multiple games for GameCube or the Wii and the Game Boy Advance and all that stuff. Never won anything.
Yeah. I didn't. I mean, I won some contests like in more recent times. Like I won a couple years ago, just retweeting somebody. I won a 4-day badge to PAX, which was awesome.
Yeah.
Nice.
But before, back in the day and stuff, I always tried entering the ultimate gaming like setup because I was like, I'm like, man, I only have a PlayStation. I want that GameCube. I want that Dreamcast. I want that Xbox. I want that TV. Like, I don't even care that it'll barely fit in my room. I want all of that in here. And like, so I was always filling those out and sending them off, but never won.
Yeah.
I only remember entering one Nintendo Power contest. I kind of mentioned, I guess, earlier, but it was the Super Smash Bros. Issue. So I think that was actually the second issue I got. I think it was issue 118, right after the Mario Party issue. But it was such a cool contest. It was like, I was like, man, you'd be an idiot not to enter this.
Yeah.
Because I remember it was like, it gave you like every single Nintendo system before, plus like almost every single game from all the main characters in Smash Bros. I mean, you got Metroid, you got all the Zeldas, and even they had a Virtual Boy even they were giving away too, which is just crazy to even think of, which is, you know, as much as Nintendo basically hates Virtual Boy. But of course,
The Nintendo Museum says different.
Yeah, right. But yeah, man, I kind of want to know who did win that. Like, that they were freaking lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember entering any of the sweepstakes. I you know what is funny is that what turned me off to entering any kind of sweepstakes. This is a huge departure, but when your ability to possibly win the Simpsons house after the Who Shot Mr. Burns thing happened the summer after season 6, like, and then it just kind of like failed and fell away because you had to call 1-800-collect. I'm like, this is what it takes to win a sweep. No, count me out. And I was what, 10? So yeah, I didn't really enter any kind of sweepstakes after that. And even if I wanted to, I would have to ask my parents for a stamp, and no.
Yep.
Sorry.
So before we go to the next question, I want to bring this up. So there was a contest that was very infamous from Nintendo Power back in 1995 because they were promoting the Super Nintendo game based on the movie The Mask, and they had a contest based on The Mask 2, where you could be a cast member of the game, well, the movie actually, rather, and there was actually somebody that did win. Because this is from Volume 77, published in October of 1995. One lucky winner would be an extra in The Mask 2. So, who was that person? Named Nathan Ryan Runk from Abutus, Maryland. He entered the contest. He won it. Despite never getting a chance to be a part of the movie with Jim Carrey. So because the movie was canceled because Jim Carrey, after Ace Ventura, When Nature Calls, while it did all right in the box office, he felt like he did not challenge himself well enough in the sequel. As a result, he felt like he could not do the same thing for The Mask 2. Therefore, The Mask 2 got canceled. And as a result, what happened was this. When Nintendo found out about the fact that the movie was canceled, and they were letting him know of updates as to when this kid was going to get to be a part of the movie. And then on November 4th, 1996, he got a letter that was an apology about the Mask 2 movie being canceled. And what happened was that he got in contact with Leslie Swan, who is a current localizer director for Nintendo of America for the Treehouse. And she was also the voice of Princess Peach in Super Mario 64. She was the one that notified the winner of the fact that the movie was canceled, and as an apology, he ended up getting a jacket, a couple of Super Nintendo games, and $5,000. Like, he had the option. Well, the movie was this actually he found out before the movie was canceled, but he had the option to wait or to take the money, the games, and the jacket. And he chose the money, the games, and the jacket. And he already just got an N64, so getting that money definitely helped him. Like, I guess that helped him be set for a while for the N64. So, so
he had a better outcome than I did.
So in the end, for his case, all was not lost. Although in the final issue of Nintendo Power Magazine, they did apologize to the winner, because that was a very infamous moment where The Mask 2 was canceled, and at least he got something out of it, because he did win, so they had to give him something. So 5,000, some Super Nintendo games, and a jacket definitely worked out in the end. The next question is, what issue of Nintendo Power was the most memorable? The Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest issue, where they had the head decapitated. That's what I would go with.
Oh yeah, definitely memorable.
Yep.
Yeah, the one I showed before, probably, we were saying that it was probably one of the most well-sold of Nintendo Power. I would also say, I think another important volume was the sleek picture of Link upon the release of Ocarina of Time.
Yep.
You know, it was just this nice clean white behind his face. It was just very iconic. I vividly remember that image. I mean, I have it behind me, but like, I could just see it in my head and how it looks and just how I felt holding it in my hand. And they were like, this is our biggest issue, like, ever, like more pages than ever before, you know. So that, I think, was another important issue. But I would also say there was this volume of Electronic Gaming Monthly when the PlayStation was coming out. I can't recall, but I remember it was like they're entering the game. Literally, like they were just coming in, and I just remember seeing it from a friend of mine at school, and I was just like, Sony, like the guy who makes why is there I don't know why there is PlayStation. Anyway, so I don't know why that happened.
Back, aren't you?
But the guy who makes Walkmans, like CDs, like they're entering video games. You know, when you're a kid, you're like thinking to yourself, well, there's only two, but no, there isn't, obviously. But that volume of Electronic Gaming Monthly actually was like, oh, like we're about to have competition. And as a Nintendo kid, I was like, oh, well, I don't know what's going to happen next. But yeah, I vividly remember like seeing that written down in print that they were going to be in the video game industry. And of course, we all know why. But yeah, I vividly remember those being very important to how things were transitioning and also what video games were about to do. I mean, Ocarina of Time is extremely influential in how it used targeting and how it used your ability to get around. And you know, if Mario 64 was one of those games where it taught you how to play a 3D game, Ocarina of Time taught you how to explore a 3D game, like how to, you know, utilize exploratory units of, you know, how far can you target, how far can you see in a distance. You know, there are little things there that the magazine was able to kind of explain to you, and yeah, very impactful.
Yep.
So for me, I think, you know, obviously the first issue is the most iconic one for me. But the one I remember the most, and I actually picked this one up kind of recently, is one of the Mario 64 ones. Because these were some of the issues I did get during high school. And we're talking about, you know, how well that went over back in the day. And I was running around excited, going like, oh my God, look at this game that's coming out. I was even the kid that got a hold of a controller early and was trying to show people like, look, this is how it'll play. And they're just kind of looking at me like, what is wrong with you? But I think the other one that I remember the most, I like going back to, you're talking about, you showed it earlier, Jeremy, the issue 100. Because they did go back and show so much of the history of it, and it was kind of a celebration of Nintendo Power and Nintendo itself. Yep, I have that issue. I just didn't get to pull it with me. So I think those are the ones that kind of come to mind first for a lot of those with me.
Yeah. Another one I want to bring up, I remember like a couple of others I want to bring up. There was issue 50, which had the owl from Link's Awakening.
Yes.
And it was all gold in the background. I thought that looked really cool. Also the one where it was a silver cover, and then when you flip it, you see Mega Man X.
There's the poster. Yep.
There's the poster. Yeah, the Mega Man X one, which I know that Nostalgia Alchemist has, which is really cool artwork. When you actually flip it, you see Mega Man X. But yeah, like right there. But yeah, like because that was actually cool. Like funny enough, on the wall over there, you can easily see it right there.
Mm-hmm.
That because I have that. Because to me, I felt that was very iconic. Pretty much anything Mega Man like that they had like on the cover, I felt was really worth sharing. But yeah, do you have any McPatches that you could think of?
I mean, with like, I was never really into Nintendo Power growing up because I diverted off of Nintendo pretty early.
Yeah.
I still liked Nintendo and played them and stuff, but it wasn't in my house really until the Wii. My mom got one. But as far as like iconic like magazine covers and stuff. I can remember some of the hand-drawn art on like PlayStation Magazine and stuff, the different ones they did, like the Final Fantasy covers and like the Resident Evil like hand-drawn art that they did for that. Like just some of those are like the kind of nostalgic covers for me.
Yep. Let's see. And RGB, do you have any others you want to share?
Oh my gosh. I was trying to think if there's any. Y'all kind of covered almost the ones I was thinking of too.
I just had a memory pop up thinking of like those offshoots. I don't remember which company it was. Do you remember the ones when they would do the swimsuit issues of like different video game characters and stuff? Does anybody remember that?
Yes.
I kind of remember that, but I don't remember which.
I don't remember what company did that, but I remember there being like swimsuit issues of video game characters at one point.
Someone in chat was asking about the cards for the Nintendo Power, so I had to go tearing through my card set. I've got a couple pages of them. I don't know exactly how many there were, but I did go through and start getting a bunch of these back then.
Yep.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's really cool. That is thoroughly impressed that you kept them like that. That's awesome.
It's not just the trading cards, but there were also Pogs.
Yes, I have 2 Mega Man X Pogs when they came out, but that's all I have left.
Man, I wish I got those. Like I was actually kind of into Pogs, but then that kind of faded away. And one more magazine that I actually posted in the podcast guest room for you guys to see. It was EGM2, and it was a cover for Street Fighter Alpha 2. Alpha 2 back then was amazing. I remember, like, Street Fighter Alpha 1 was fine, but Street Fighter Alpha 2 just blew it out of the water.
I have that issue. It's such a good one to go through, too.
Yeah, like,
cool.
that cover is iconic. And that cover of, like, you see Ryu, Akuma, and you see Sakura in the background. Well, without the Sakura in the background, the inspiration comes from a classic WWF magazine. Like, at the time, it was Hulk Hogan, Andre the Giant on there. That was the inspiration. And they took that and used Akuma. They have Ryu. Just how cool that artwork was for Street Fighter Alpha 2 back then. It was amazing. What I also remember in general is just how like they would use the box arts for these games and just how cool they looked when you see the clean artwork. It was amazing. So one more question, and this one is, what games did you first discover because of gaming magazines existing primarily before the internet? That's a very loaded question. I'm going to answer that in a little bit, but I want like these guys to answer before me. So whoever wants to answer that.
I remember specifically finding out the first little preview pictures of Super Mario Brothers 4 before we knew it was called Super Mario World. And that was also when I was learning what the Super Nintendo was supposed to be, or it didn't have the name of Super Nintendo then. I think they were still referring to it as Super Famicom. And then, I was wondering what the hell a Famicom was. And, it's just, I just remember seeing so much about that ahead of time. Like, oh, he rides a dinosaur? What the heck?
Yeah. I think the one that really sticks out in my mind, besides Paper Mario, when I kind of covered that, was like, remember when it was called Super Mario 128 first came out, and it eventually became Super Mario Sunshine. That was probably one of the coolest things that kind of got me into that one too. I think they still didn't someone just uncover like the original demo for that? I think too just got released.
I didn't hear about that.
I don't know if that one did. I know a bunch of them did though, because that was a lot of the stuff from Space World 2000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think like one of the games off the top of my head, I remember the Wario Land games, because I had a Game Boy Advance, but I remember I pretty much just played RPGs, ports and stuff that came to it.
Yeah.
But I remember seeing in the magazines about like the Wario Land games, and like I mentioned earlier, Code Veronica. That one was a big one that I remember like reading about a lot, and then being bummed it wasn't on PlayStation. And then of course it was later on PlayStation, but
Right.
yeah. So those are the ones that are off the top of my head that I can remember, like learning about in the magazines.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, this is gonna sound a little bit further from what we're discussing, but I think the best things that I found out about games was when Nintendo Power would send the VHS tapes home.
Yeah.
That's when I found out about Donkey Kong Country, and then watched all the way to the end of the tape and found out about Killer Instinct. And then I would watch the N64 tape, and I would learn about Mario 64, Pilot Wings, and Shadows of the Empire, and all of the other games that were in development at the time when Wave Race actually looks like boats instead of the people. Yeah, that's it. And then, you had the Banjo-Kazooie tape, voiced over by John Lovitz. I love it. But yeah, I think those were the most interesting games that I discovered, but through Nintendo Power by other means.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I can think of was in high school, for me at least, seeing the tech specs of the GameCube and how it was going to look, what the controller looked like, that whole spread from that E3 that year. I was, oh my gosh, going into my sophomore or junior year of high school, going into junior year or sophomore, I can't remember, but they showed the tech specs, and I was like, oh, Nintendo's finally putting their games on a slightly smaller disc, but it's okay. It's digital, but yeah, those tapes were awesome, and those were basically your introduction to how a game would look and sound and possibly feel. Those were really cool. So I would probably pin it to the and lest I forget the beautiful performances in the Star Fox 64 VHS. Oh my gosh, that okay, if there's anything to look up on YouTube tonight, chat, please do yourself a favor and look up Star Fox 64 promo VHS. You will not be disappointed. Seeing Mario's head in a vice is just the most juiced.
So I have to add to that, they did a Donkey Kong 64 one. And I've been trying to collect and find a bunch of these VHS tapes, and I've got a whole set of equipment where I digitize them and put them up on YouTube. And I did that one. And the guy, so over the top, who does the whole, crush me, Big Daddy, crush me line. I recorded that, made a meme. It was hilarious. I actually got in touch with the guy and found him and sent it to him. He's like, oh, God, that came back again. That was like one of my first jobs. And because I looked it up and I found his IMDb and reached out to him. He's just like, great, that's coming back. But I have that whole thing recorded. I have a couple of those recorded over on our YouTube channel as well.
Yeah, I was just saying that VHS did get me hyped for Donkey Kong 64 and oh wow, what was the other game on there that it just jumped out of my Jet Force Gemini. That one looked good. I still haven't had a chance to play through that one, but I do own it. I'm excited for it one of these times.
I never had the VHS tapes, but I did watch them on YouTube, and the Star Fox one was definitely infamous because like the whole Sega and Sony representatives there.
If anybody is part of Shellshock's Discord, I just posted in the podcast guest area the playlist of 10 VHS tapes that somebody put out on YouTube in a playlist. So please enjoy.
Yep.
I don't know if I can post in your chat, Shellshock. Do I have permissions or no?
I mean, you can. But thank you for that. I was actually gonna look for those myself, but thank you for that. You saved me the trouble.
I just put it in chat.
Thanks.
You're very welcome.
So now for mine. So in terms of the games that I got into thanks to gaming magazines, especially before the internet, well, for me, I would more likely say like a lot of games that Capcom worked on that weren't just Street Fighter or Mega Man. Like, it's how I learned more about Resident Evil. It's how I learned more about about the Darkstalkers series. It's how I learned more about their later stuff. I will learn about Devil May Cry. I will learn about like Onimusha, like besides seeing the ads. I would learn about a lot of the games they were working on, plus especially seeing like the type of Mega Man games that were being pushed around this time as well. Like especially like reading about the Mega Man Legends series when the series was going into 3D, learning about how Street Fighter went to 3D with Street Fighter EX, how Capcom was focusing heavily on the PlayStation around that time after being mostly focusing on Nintendo with a little bit of Sega. And it got to the point where it's like, I had to wait until close to the end of the N64's life cycle to get a Mega Man game, and it was just Mega Man 64, which was basically Mega Man Legends 1. Really good game, by the way. Still have the cartridge. But learning about the GameCube back in 2001 got me really hyped for the GameCube. As well as Game Boy Advance. I was like, yes, this was absolute hype. I could not wait to play Super Smash Bros. Melee. I enjoyed Smash, but I was like, Melee, I could not wait to play back then. As well as, like, I was one of the few people back then who actually was hyped for Wind Waker, because a lot of people were angry about Wind Waker, but I was hyped for it. I wanted to play it.
The animation details. It was beautiful.
But when we got, my brother borrowed Wind Waker from one of his friends, and then like his friend asked for it back before we even had a chance to do much with the game. Though I eventually, though I eventually did beat Wind Waker, but it was the HD version.
Well, that was one of the times I actually did subscribe to Nintendo Power because I wanted to get the Zelda collection you could get, and then they had the pre-order one for Wind Waker as well. That's how you would get both those Zelda collections at the time.
Yeah. I like the GameCube as a whole was what really like got me hyped. Also, seeing reading up like multiple articles regarding the PS1 and N64 eras of like what games they had during that generation. Like also the last, like I said earlier, the last issue of the Game Informer that I had from that sub that I had, knowing about Earthbound, so there's that. And then it's like I didn't hear anything about Earthbound again until 1999 when NES was added to Super Smash Brothers. And then when I got Smash, that was actually what led me to get Earthbound, and now Earthbound is one of my all-time favorite video games. Like, I legit would not even be here if it wasn't for that game. That game is amazing. It means so much to me, but
yeah,
I'll probably have a share with Shellshock episode about the Mother series in the future, but I want to at least play Mother 3 first before I do it.
Which ironically, I just found they were previewing it in the Nintendo Power, talking about it for their next issue.
Yep. And also, like, learning about pretty much seeing these games, and also like seeing, and what helped was seeing friends play some of these games that I was reading up on, like WarioWare, Mega Micro games for the Game Boy Advance, Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga. Like, I would see my friends in high school play that game to the point where I'm like, oh, these games look great, I gotta get them. And WarioWare I got because I did really well in 10th grade for just doing good. I like, my mom asked me what game did I want, and I asked for WarioWare because at the time I just wanted to play WarioWare, and she just got it for me, and I just loved it. And Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga at the time was a Christmas gift, along with Fire Emblem and many other gifts. One of the best Christmases I've ever had, actually. But it opened me up to so many different games. Like, not just Nintendo Power, but pretty much like any video game magazine. Like, reading about, like I mentioned before, when I got a GamePro issue in January 2002, where they had Goku and Vegeta fused, and it was, I believe, it was Vegito Super Saiyan, because they were hyping up Dragon Ball Z games being made for the United States audience at the time, because Dragon Ball Z was huge. People talk about how Pokemon was huge. Dragon Ball Z was like, if not number one, it was number two. Like Dragon Ball Z was that huge at the time. Everybody wanted anything regarding Dragon Ball Z, and to get games, because a lot of the games were Japan only, so, and many of which were on platforms that were no longer being supported. PlayStation 1 was still kind of supported, but not really. But it was when we got Dragon Ball Z, The Legacy of Goku for the Game Boy Advance, and Dragon Ball Z Budokai for the PS2, where everything started to take off. So yeah, it's one of those moments where you just had to be there. How, like, people have their own anime they would be into, like My Hero Academia, Naruto, One Piece, all those animes. But for me, Dragon Ball Z. But yeah, so that's basically it for me. And that's all the questions. That's pretty much just gonna do it for sharing with Shellshock. And again, thank you guys for being a part of this. I really appreciate it so much.
Of course.
Yes.
Thank you for putting this on, Shell. It's always
Yeah,
fun.
this was a great discussion with everybody. Thank you for sharing everything.
It was a great time.
Yep.
Yeah.
But
Down
before
nostalgia road.
indeed, before we wrap things up, so Jeremy, Nostalgia Alchemist, where can we find you?
Right here. I've always been here. No, anywhere. Google the Nostalgia Alchemist, Linktree it. All of the stuff is there, and all the entertainment options that I have to offer. And not only on top of that, but if you look up my real name, Jeremy Lardiri, I am a union actor, a performer. You'll be able to find some of my stuff there as well. Thank you again, Shellshock, and it was very nice to meet all of you tonight.
Yep.
Same.
Same.
So
You as well.
McPatches, where can we find you?
Mostly on Twitch. I'm active on Twitter, a little bit on TikTok, but mostly on Twitch. I'm starting to branch out a little, but I'll be like promoting that more actually once I actually get that ball rolling,
Yep.
so that I'm not like just puffing smoke, you know.
Yep.
But yeah, mostly Twitch.
Okay.
Really.
And ZensPath, where can we find you?
So you can find us each week over at the ZensPath Entertainment Network podcast, where I host that with some friends. We're just talking up gaming and everything. Mostly over on Threads nowadays at ZensPath. And then, of course, at youtube.com/ZensPathCom.
Yeah.
Where we put the video versions of it. And I also will record like the opening or promotional sections of gaming to try and preserve those and put it up for a lot of people to see. So,
Yep.
yeah, find me there.
Awesome. And Retro Gaming Backlog, where can we find you?
You can mainly find me right here on Twitch. Pretty much try to stream at least 4 times a week. But yeah, we're right now I'm fixing my computer, so we'll be getting back on that.
Yep. And of course, you can find me on pretty much any part of the stratosphere, ShellshockPrime. I'm pretty much just almost everywhere you could think of. Although I probably would not be on a certain platform much longer because it's a sinking ship. But everything else, yeah, sure, you can find me pretty much anywhere. Next week we're going to be doing an episode on Mega Man memories, and joining me for that are both Nadia and David Oxford, as well as Super Squaz Plays and Rick from the D-Pad. Those will be my guests for the next show next week at 8 p.m. Eastern, October 13th. So that's going to be a great discussion. It's the second Mega Man themed episode, and I'm looking forward to talking about Mega Man once again. I mean, I always find ways to talk about Mega Man in every episode. Let's be honest.
Shell, you'll be happy to know that this year my son wants to be Mega Man for Halloween.
Heck yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. That's excellent.
I will, and he met my son, so I'll DM you a picture of him in his costume. Absolutely.
Sounds great. Yep. But yeah, so yeah, that's gonna do it. All right, so with that in mind, that is going to do it for sharing with Shellshock. Again, to both of the Jeremys, to McPatches and to RGB, thank you so much for being a part of this. I really appreciate it. It was fun. It was a great discussion, and I hope to have you guys on again in the future. But until next time, may you all take care of yourselves. Be awesome. Stay awesome. Tell your loved ones you love them. Check up on them as always. Fight for lasting peace. And I'll see you guys next time. And remember, get the power, Nintendo power. Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Good night, y'all.
Peace.
Yep.